Hey, what's up, comrades? It's time to start a new anime to watch. So this time, I was going to start watching Serial Experiments Lane, but since I watched a lot of these with my daughter, she was like, "There's no princesses in this. I don't want to watch it." Granted, it wasn't working super well on the VLC either, so I couldn't watch it a little sped up because that's how I like to watch things. And so I was like, "Yeah, whatever. I'll just put this in my backlog of things to get around to eventually someday when I have more time." And we're going to watch Frieren. I don't remember what the subtitle is, but Frieren's pretty popular anime as of the last year or so. It's based on a light novel, from what I understand, and it's about this. It's so you have like your traditional fantasy traveling party, like Tolkien's. You got the dwarf, you got the elf, and then you got the humans, the human priest, and the human hero. So definitely take some JRPG elements from that regard, because hero is like a class for some reason. Anyway, and this is post. They've destroyed the demon lord king monster thing and saved the world, and they're all celebrating. And then they're talking about what they're going to do next. And so Furian's like, I'm going to go look around for magic and whatever. I'll meet up with you guys in 50 years, because there's like a meteor shower, and they're looking at it from inside like the Capitol or whatever. And she's like, I know a much better place to watch this, so we'll just do it again. And the guy's like, well, it happens every 50 years. And she's like, yeah, that's nothing. I'll see you guys in 50 years. And then he just laughs, and she's like, what's so funny? And he's like, nothing. And so I get a little confused about the age of some of these guys, because it seems like there's the hero, he's human, and he looks like he's 20. And then there's the priest, who's also human, and he looks like he's 30. And they've been traveling together for like 10 years. So my assumption is, let's say it's traditional JRPG, and the main character is like 16-ish. So now at the end of the adventure, he's 26. The priest must be the exact same age, even though he looks like he's older, maybe because he's got glasses and he's taller. And then there's the dwarf, and the dwarf's just kind of being a dwarf, quiet and stuff. And then Frieren looks like she's 17, obviously, forever, because she's an elf. All right, so she goes and does like magical bullshit for a while, and then she's looking for like an ingredient, and she can't find it, and she's like, oh yeah, I have one of those. I gave it to human hero guy, and it's been almost 50 years, so let me go check up on him. So she heads back to the Capitol, and she makes some passing comments about how, oh, this looks, very different than it did before. And then she hears her name, and she turns, and it's this old balding guy with a long beard who's short. And she's like, hello? And he's like, or no, I think she recognizes him. She's like, oh, it's me, hero guy. And she's like, oh. And he's like, I'm still so handsome, even though I'm old. And so it's been 50 years. So let's say he's 26. Now he's 76 years old, right? Okay. And so that means the priest is also roughly around that same age, if not even older, right? Unless he was younger. He was like 14 when this adventure started, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. But I don't know. They don't really go into detail here, maybe in the light novel. So she's like she wants to meet up with everybody else, and so they can go see this shower somewhere, because it's like a week's worth of a journey. And to meet up with the priest, and the priest is now like a bishop, or like the pope, essentially, of like the holy church and like the holy city. And then the dwarf is still just kind of like a dwarf. He's older, but not as old as like the humans. And the hero's just like chilling. He's been living like a lonely life his whole life. It's kind of sad, actually. Like later on when he dies, so they go to the meteor shower. They have like one more adventure where mostly Frieren and the dwarf are like fighting it and kill the monsters, while the other guys just like watching. Are like, yeah. So they're at this meteor shower, and they're loving it. And he's like, the hero's like, thank you so much for giving me one last adventure. I really appreciate it. And then he dies, and so they bury him in like the Capitol. And there's some people at the funeral, and like young women and men who are like bad mouthing Frieren because she looks cold, like she doesn't care, right? So I don't know if they're like related. It doesn't come up, but I don't know. I would assume this dude got like married and had family and stuff. Like, he's a hero. He's probably like, getting that dick wet is not a hard thing to do. And he's like, he keeps talking about how he's handsome for the first like 5 minutes of the show, where he's actually like young and alive. So I'd be kind of surprised if that wasn't the case. Maybe the anime just didn't like deal with it at all, because whatevs. But I'm gonna go ahead and assume, because otherwise that's really sad. He lived like 50 years by himself, just like watching this fucking like evil artifact that she left with him. Like, man, I'm gonna just assume his wife died too. So mid-70s fantasy world, yeah, it's fine. And so she ends up breaking down when they're burying him about how she doesn't understand humans, and how she wished she spent more time with him before he passed, and all this stuff. And then the priest is like, all right, well, I guess I better get back to the capital. And he says something about like, I'm not afraid of death. And she's like, okay, well, I'll come find you before you die or whatever. And he's like, yeah, whatever. If I'm already dead, just like, bring a bottle to my grave. We're all guaranteed to go to heaven because of our works for destroying the Demon King anyway, so what do I care? And then her and the dwarf are just left, and she's like, hey, I'm going to go adventuring for some time. Do you want to come with me? And he's like, I'm too old for that shit, man. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, he's just like, rolls his eyes essentially. He's like, I'll catch you. And, he's like, I'm going to go. And she's like, well, I'll come we'll meet again and hang out. And he's like, all right, whatever. Like, you do you. Not in a bad way, just in like a gruffy, gruff dwarf way. He's like, all right. And so he leaves, and then she goes on like more adventures. And eventually she's in this woods looking around, and she runs into this purple-haired girl, and the girl's like, are you lost? And she's like, oh, I'm looking for a priest. And so she takes him to this like cabin, and he's still there. So, and it's been 20 years according to what it's saying. And so this dude's at least 94 to 96 years old, if not older. And he's looking spry, to be honest. Like, I'm impressed. Like, oh damn, he's still alive. So he's like, hey, they're just chatting. She's like, oh, I'm glad I caught you when you were still alive. I just want to hang out and like get to know you better and stuff. I'm like, girl, what were you doing for the last 20 fucking years? Anyway, he's like, can I ask you one favor? And she's like, sure. And he's like, will you take my, this orphan? She died in like these wars in the South. Can you make her your apprentice and teach her to be a mage? And then Frieren's like, I don't want to do that because apprentices die all the time, and I don't want like your ghost to come haunt me because I killed like this orphan girl at your apprentice. And he's like, all right, I got this other favor. And he hands her like this old like grimoire, and he's like, hey, so there's some spells in here with that I can't interpret. If you could interpret it, that'd be great. One of the spells is immortality. And she's like, I thought you weren't afraid of death. And he's like, ha ha ha, I guess I was lying. And he's like, hey, if you don't do it, whatever. If you do, that'd be great. It'd just be nice if you tried. And she's like, well, it's gonna take me 5 or 6 years. So then we go back to the math, and it's like, this dude's gonna be 100 fucking years old by the time this thing goes down. Like, all right, whatevs. Anyway, and he's like, well, since you're gonna be here hanging out for like the next 5 or 6 years anyway, do you mind just training this chick on magic while you're here? You're not going to like be her master and apprentice, but she can learn from you. And she's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so then Frieren goes to find the purple-haired girl, which is interesting because like while they're talking, she's like in the background cleaning, and then all of a sudden she's like looking for her in the woods, and she's like, oh, you found me, that's impressive, master or whatever. The priest, he's never been able to find me. And then Frieren makes a comment about like, yeah, she's really good at like repressing her mana signals. And the way the girl talks is kind of like, what do the kids say these days? Sus? It's kind of sus. Like, is she going to be evil? I don't know. And then she casts like this crazy like black lightning spell at this rock across a crevasse and misses. Or it doesn't miss. It just doesn't go far enough. And she's like, the priest said I would be a true mage when I get to blow a hole in that rock, but I can't ever get this thing across. And then Frieren makes some comment to her. And that wraps up the first episode. So next up, Frieren continues to teach our little mage girl, Ren. She's got purple hair. That's that's all that's really important, I guess. Magic for 4 years. And we get a montage of her hanging out with the priest and studying the book he gave her, the grimoire, and teaching Ren magic and all this stuff. And then at some point, after these 4 years, now this dude's like 100 years old almost, he collapses and he's bedridden for maybe another year. It seems some more time goes by, and Ren still, like, Frieren's trying to get Ren to like spend time with him before he dies, and she's like, no. And she tells like the really sad story about how like she was orphaned and then with the wars, and then she was gonna like throw herself off a cliff and die, but then the priest, I caught his name, is like, it wasn't Hector. Hater. It was Hater. Hater, the priest, decided, he rescued her and gave her like purpose in life, and that they had like a strong bond. And when he like retired and from the priestcraft or whatever, he came over to this cabin, and they just hung out until Frieren showed up. We also learn that Ren's whole purpose is to find a way to support herself before a Hater dies, and the fact that he's injured makes her like more staunchly like, I have to learn how to support myself. I can't let him down. He has to understand. So eventually she blows a hole in that rock, and there's some like magic talk and montages and all that. And Frieren finally finishes translating the grimoire, and then she walks in and like throws the manuscript on his chest, and she's like, there's nothing in here about immortality or like bringing people back from the dead. And he's like, oh, is that? He's like, oh, that's silly. And she's like, you fucking tricked me. And he's like, you bet I did. So now that Ren can use magic well, she's not going to be a hindrance to you, and you can take her as your apprentice on your journeys. And Frieren's like, you motherfucker. And she's like, why'd you do it? And then he talks very glowingly about the hero and how the hero like inspired him to be better because he's like a corrupt priest and like kind of a drunk and he's just very selfish. And that his plan originally, when he kind of got done with the priesthood, being the pope or whatever he was to kind of like just, you know, chill and drink and carouse. But then, you know, the more he thought about it, the more he's like, no, I need to do something with my life. And then he met the orphan girl Ren, and he's like, this is my purpose. And he like recalls the hero character, I can't remember his name, helping people constantly. And so then he dies and they bury him, and she pours a bunch of liquor on his tomb like he asked. And Frieren and Ren go on their adventure. And then we get like a chapter break, which is interesting. So I guess like episode 1 is chapter 0, or maybe that was all chapter 1 and now we're in chapter 2. I don't know. But this is the same episode, number 2. So that was interesting. I guess maybe it's the light novel, the way it's broken up. I don't know. So Frieren and Ren are just like going around doing like various tasks for people to get like magic scrolls and stuff. Just kind of like what Frieren likes to do on her own anyway. So they're like helping this guy get pumpkins and clean them off. They're helping like clean statues. They're helping do all sorts of things. And Ren's like, what are we doing? And Frieren's like, oh, you know, we're just like enjoying life. And, you know, I like my hobby is to collect magic spells. And she's like, what do we get this time? It's like, ooh, it's a spell to make delicious tea. That's delightful. And then they meet this old woman, and this old woman's like, oh, I just need help cleaning this statue. I don't have any spells for you. And Frieren's like, no, that's cool. You can just teach us about the local flora and fauna, and that'll be, or the local flora, and that'll be fine. And then the statue that the old lady wants them to clean is the statue of the hero. And then Frieren like recalls when they were saved the town. Well, the old lady recalls when they saved the town, and like she was almost killed by like a demon, and then the hero, like specifically the hero, came and saved her. And she was like inspired, and so she's an old lady now, but she's been trying to maintain this property or the statue, and like no one else is really helping her, and she's too old to like take care of herself. So Frieren and Ren like clean it up, and then one of them's like, you know, it'd be nice like some color around here, and so they're about to summon a bunch of flowers, and then Frieren's like, wait, no, I want to do something weed, like I can't remember, but it's the flower that was from the hero's hometown that she never got to see. Yeah, she never saw. So then the old lady's like, yeah, we used to have some flowers like that around here, but they've all died out. And apparently she has to, if she hasn't seen a flower, she can't create a spell to make the flowers appear. So then they go on like a journey around the neighborhood, just trying to like recover seeds or some indication, or find like a small batch of these flowers that are hidden somewhere. We also, around this point, Ren like makes friends with these like seed mice who steal seeds and then they go bury them. And, you know, sometimes I forget where they bury them, and then that's what they eat is these seeds, which is important because they spend a while here, and then, like, Ren's getting really frustrated, and she's talking to the old woman about it, and she's like, I don't understand. She has so much magical power. Why doesn't she go, like, save people and do stuff? She's just, like, fucking around, like, collecting magic. And the old lady's like, well, she's much more mature than us and has, like, her own motivations. And I don't agree. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but she's, like, her conception of like time and everything is completely different than like yours or ours, which is interesting. And then she pulls out this little seed bag and gives it to Ren, and then Ren takes it to Frieren and, you know, tells her like her issues. Oh, the old lady encourages her to be open and honest, which is like fantastic advice for any relationship, friendship, romantic, whatever. It's always be 100% honest about everything. So Ren gives her the seeds and says, these aren't the seeds for that plant, but they're like a related species or whatever. And so then Frieren is like, oh, excellent, we'll definitely find these flowers soon. And Ren's like, soon for you or soon for like everybody else? And Frieren's like, just soon, don't worry about it. And so she leaves some of the seeds like on this log and casts a spell, and then one of the seed mice comes and like steals one of the seeds and runs off. And so they follow the seed mouse to this tower, and they have like a conversation about the seed mouse and like how it's kind of dumb. And then they fly up to the top of the tower, and the whole top of the tower is full with these plants that she was looking for. And she recalls this time when like her and her compatriots found this like old shrine, and it was pretty run down. And then she casts a spell, making a huge flower garden like everywhere around them. And the hero's like makes her like this leafy laurel kind of situation. And then he's like, oh, it'd be great if you could see these flowers. They're my favorite. They're from my hometown. And she's like, and she's like, yeah. And he's like, someday maybe we'll find them. And she's like, sure. And that it clearly never happened, but she was able to learn the spell for these flowers, and then they go back to the statue, and she creates like a circle of these flowers, and the old lady's like super happy, like, wow, I never thought I'd see these flowers again, and they're very pretty and blue. And then yeah, that's the end of the second episode. So episode 3 is broken into 2 parts. It seems like that's how they're doing this thing, and we get Frieren and Ren are in a town, and Frieren's like, hey, I'm gonna go do some shopping. And Ren is concerned because every time she goes off and does shopping, she has this look, and then she comes back with like a crazy stuff, like a skull or a history book or whatever stuff. And they're not like rolling in dough because they do like medium skilled jobs, essentially, for like chump change and like spells stuff. And so Ren decides she's going to follow her, and she finds Frieren buying jewelry or something and being very confused about what she should do. And then she follows her to a guy and she asks about sweets. And the guy's like, oh, you should check out this tavern. And then, so at the tavern, there's a bunch of rough-looking dudes, like one with a mohawk and all that. And then Ren's about ready to like jump in and help fight them, but they're just like sweet dude adventurers who have the greatest sweet tooths of all time. They like recommend like the best dessert place in town, I guess. So then Frieren heads back to the inn. Ren, in the meanwhile, is like, shoot, I'm running late. So she runs and does all the shopping she was supposed to do this whole time instead of just following around Frieren. And when she shows up, Frieren's like, let's put the stuff down and go. And she takes Ren to this dessert place and asks her to order whatever she wants. And Ren's like, how can we afford this? And Frieren's like, oh, I've been saving up. And Ren makes the comment in her head, it's like, wow, she actually does know how to save money. So they order desserts, and then Frieren gives her, it's like a brooch for her hair, or a brooch I don't think is the right term for whatever. It's like a hair scrunchy thing, but it's like a beautiful silver thing. And it's obviously for Ren's birthday. She's now 16, which makes her an adult. In her opinion, it makes her adult, I guess, like most 16-year-olds. Because she brings it up like 3 or 4 different times. She's like, well, I'm an adult now. Or like, I'm not a child. I don't think she ever says she's an adult, but she keeps referring to herself as not a child anymore. I'm 16. I'm not a child. Like, all right. Frieren's like 500 years old. Who knows? I don't think they've identified her age at this point. But she's at least 100 plus years old. So it just kind of cracks me up. Anyway, so that's that part. This is like cute little like adventure with birthday and like getting to know the interactions between the 2 main characters. So then the next portion of the episode, the next part, they head towards this village, and at some point she's like, Ren's like, where are we going? And Frieren's like, I just want to retrace some of the journeys we took when we defeated the Demon King. And they go to this town. Oh, and then Ren makes an interesting comment about, she's like, oh, so you're trying to remember something? Or she says something like very profound. And then Frieren's like, I don't know. I guess I'll find out on the way. And it's like, awesome. It's so good. The show reminds me a lot of Violet Evergarden. I feel like Violet, yeah, because it's just like, it's like very slice of life, but kind of fantasy. But slice of life in like the best possible way. Not slice of life as in just like people sitting around going to high school and doing high school stuff or whatever. But like, nothing's really happening. They're just kind of like existing and living in this fantasy world. But there's like everything's like very profound and very interesting, and like just the focus on the characters and their relationship and like who they are developmental wise, and just some of their like little adventures they go on and what it means to Frieren, particularly. It's very interesting. It's very like cozy, and you always like, it's like, yeah, you got a good feeling afterwards. Like I get why this is so popular, to be completely honest, especially with women. This is like right in their niche, I would say. It's just like cozy and like, hanging out and good stuff and delicious looking food, right? It's like, it's definitely a chick anime thus far. But I like it. I like this kind of shit. I'm comfortable with my feminine side, if you will. So here we are. We get to this town, and, they walk up to this group of men, and one guy's like, oh, you're Frieren the elf. And she's like, yeah, how do you know me? And he's like, oh, Himmel, the hero, he came by like every couple of years and was like checking in on that monster you sealed. So we find out that there's one of the generals of the Demon King army, this great mage who was like one of the most powerful mages ever, and he created like the first piercing magic and all this stuff, that he was here, and that the team couldn't beat him because his magic was so strong that they just sealed him, and that the seal is getting kind of weak. And so at some point, Himmel, when he was visiting, he told this guy, he's like, hey, Frieren, he's like, thanks for checking up on you. And, they talk about the rest of the party and like, oh, Frieren seems like she's very cold and distant. And he's like, yeah, she is, but she has a good heart, so like she'll show up eventually and take care of the seal and solve that problem for you guys. So just keep an eye out. And here she is. So he takes her to where the monster is. He's just like up on a hill in like stone, and she's like, all right, yeah, the seal's definitely breaking, so we'll release him and then defeat him tomorrow. So then they go to lay down, and there's a whole thing where she keeps giving Ren a hard time because Ren needs to be studying like her history, and part of this is that Frieren like tells her and the audience, us, like the whole story that I just kind of related to about him and the development of magic and stuff. And then she's like, hey, how come you don't know this already? You've not been reading that history book I keep telling you to do. We're going to start doing story time. And this is another point where she's like, no, I'm not a kid. I'll do it. So next morning they go up there. Oh, and then they spend a little time during the day as well, like practicing defensive magic and kind of going over like the rules of defensive magic, where it's like, hey, defensive magic's really, it's really mana intensive to maintain, especially if you maintain like your whole body, you're going to exhaust yourself. So that what you really want to do is focus on like where you're getting attacked and put the energy there. So that way you're using the least amount of mana to protect you, but while still getting the protection that you need. Which is very important and very good story writing, because when they fight, they release this guy, and the guy's like, oh, Frieren, hello, welcome back. And she's like, hello. And he's like, how long's it been? She's like, 80 years. And he's like, what about the Demon King? And she's like, oh, we killed him. And he's like, then I will get my revenge. And so he casts like his signature Xantari magic or whatever. And then Ren is able to easily block it with her magic as like an apprentice. And he's like, oh, nani? And then Frieren tells him that, like, yeah, everyone was so spooked by your magic that, like, entire schools of magistry in the human world were, like, dedicated to, like, figuring out how to stop it, and they, like, figured it out after a few years, and then they, like, built, like, brand new structures, and, like, magic armor can, like, totally resist it, so it went from, like, this piercing, like, god-level tier magic to being just, like, any other kind of, like, attack magic, just, like, run-of-the-mill that you could easily defend with, like, a defensive shield or anything else. And he's like, and then she comments on like, humans are very ingenious like that. Like they get their minds to it, and they like, the vast amount of them, they'll get together and figure it out. So good for them. And he's like, whatever. And then he like describes the defensive magic and how it's changed and how it's like variable or some variable. What is it? There's like the currents. It's like accelerated current and no. It's like AC versus DC. Like one of them changes frequencies or whatever. Anyway. So he's like, whatever. And so he sends like a barrage of magic spells, and Ren just keeps defending the both of them. And then the guy notices that Frieren is in the sky flying. He's like, oh, she's flying. That's cute. And then she casts his magic against him and destroys him. And right before he dies, he's like, you stole my magic. And then he dies. Oh, man, good stuff. So then they like say their goodbyes to the town, and they're so thankful. And then Frieren notices that the guy she talked to that was talking to Himmel this whole time, he has that straw hat that looks very particular, and she mentions it, and he's like, everyone here has straw hats, and she's like, no, you're that perverted little kid who like looked under my dress and got chewed out by Himmel that one time, and he's like, ooh. Good stuff. And with that, Frieren and Ren are on their way to new adventures. So we start off this half of the episode 4 with the Frieren and Fern. I've been calling her Ren, but I feel like they're saying Fern. I apologize that I cannot understand even simple names. Anyway, so they're in this town that has a bay, and the bay's full of like sunken ships, and the old man who like runs the town, or the mayor or whatever, is like, oh, we get a lot of like shipwrecks roll in here because of the tide and whatnot, and we don't have like the manpower anymore to like clean it all up, and we'd like it cleaned up before our like New Year's Eve festival where we like all watch the sunrise. So if you did, that'd be great. And he's like, all we have is this grimoire, and he hands it over, and she looks at it, and she's like, that's all you got? And he's like, yeah. She's like, that's fine. And so once the old man leaves, Fern is like, that's a fake, right? And Frierin's like, of course I do. But that shows me that you're actually reading your history lesson, so I'm proud of you. And they know it's a fake because Frieren, who we later find out it was the lady who taught Frieren magic like over 1,000 years ago, or around 1,000 years ago, I should say. It's unclear exactly when. She has a lot of people have written like fake grimoires, but none of them are true, and that's like a known historical fact. So then Fern calls out Frieren saying, "So why are we doing this?" And she's like, "Are we doing this for you? Is this one of your things?" And then Frieren does the usual, like, "I don't know, maybe." And she has some like recollections of they were in this town at one point, and then she missed like the Sunrise Festival, and Himmel, who is the hero, gave her like a hard time about it, and then Hader, who's the priest, was like crying in his bed about it, and then the dwarf, which I forgot his name already, he was making fun of her. Anyway, so we find out that Frieren is like she's like a night owl, so Fern has to like wake her up every morning so they can go to their job. And Frieren also hates the cold. And this is all great. Like this is it's shown, right? Like it's like Fern walks in is like up in the morning and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not her mother. Why do I have to get her up every morning?" And then they're outside and it's like getting to be winter because they've been there for months at this point. Like it took them like 3 or 4 months, it seems, or maybe half a year. It took them a while. Again, with time in this, it's not like that important because we're kind of doing this from like Frieren's perspective, but then we get like Fern's commentary on it. Because at some point, and so it's excellently done. And again, this goes to like, this show is so good, and the way that it portrays things and the way it like story tells, it's like very incredible. Now, is it like the best thing ever? No. But it's just like the way it's crafted is so good. And that's, again, I compare it to like Violet Evergarden, which like you watch those episodes and some of them are kind of boring story-wise, but like just the showing things, like just utilizing the visual medium of like a television show / a cartoon here is so excellently done that you can just like, you're just like enjoying everything. Like nothing needs to be spelled out. Nothing needs to be like over-explained. It's like when the characters talk and have like some exposition, it's all very relevant to like what's going on. And it's not, it's how individuals who know stuff would speak to each other about things that they know about. Not like, "Hey, you remember this XYZ?" And then we have like the fill-in character, which is excellent, which is Fern, where she doesn't know a lot. So she'll be like, "What do you mean?" Because her, like the dwarf in Frieren, or somebody in Frieren will be talking, and then Fern will make like a comment based on what she's hearing, because she doesn't have a lot of back knowledge, right? So she's essentially the knowledge. She's speaking for us as the audience, and then Frieren or whoever will like explain a little bit more, but they'll never like over-explain. They just kind of like give her like the rough details, or like later on, after something's brought up, someone will be talking to Fern and they'll be like, "You don't really know what's going on with this." And she's like, "No, but I didn't want to like speak out of turn," because she's like an apprentice, right? And then she's with these people, especially, who are like vastly older than her, like more experienced. And then they'll kind of explain it then, right? So it's all handled excellently. So they finally, after X amount of time, it seems like 3 to 6 months, they clear out the whole bay, and then Frieren's like, I'm gonna do it this time. I don't know why. I don't know if I'm gonna enjoy it, but I'm gonna watch the sunrise. And of course she falls asleep, and so Fern has to wake her up and drag her out. And she's like, "Why am I doing this?" And they're watching the sunrise, and Frieren's like, "It's okay, I guess." And then she looks over at Fern, and Fern's like, "This is amazing. This is so beautiful. Something, something." And then Frieren like smiles and is like, "Yeah, I guess it is." And then Fern's like, "Oh, hey, I guess you did like it, or you're smiling. You must really be enjoying yourself." And Frieren's like, "Well, I'm smiling because you're smiling, because you're enjoying yourself." Right, which is adorbs, super adorbs. And that's the end of that. The next section, we learn that the dwarf's parents were killed by the Demon King, or by his army, and that he buried them in this certain location, and that's like his motivation for going and fight the Demon King, which is excellent against storytelling. And they have a whole funny conversation about heaven and if heaven exists, and the dwarf doesn't really believe in heaven, and then Frieren says, "Well, it could exist. We don't know because there's no evidence for or against." And then so then they all just decide to pray, and then we switch to the present, and Frieren and Fern are walking up on the dwarf as he's praying by his parents' grave, so he took a lot of that to heart. And then we find out him and Hader had been in communication for years after she kind of pieced out, like that 50 years plus. And so he kind of knew everything that was going on. He knew about Fern and all this stuff. And then he kind of calls her out on it, because at some point, before they kind of broke up after the Demon King, he asked her about having an apprentice. And she was like, "No." And he's like, "The journey's much happier if you have someone to hang out with." And she was like, something, I live forever. You know what I'm talking about, right, dwarf?" And he just like grumbled, because no, he disagrees, because clearly he's kept friendships with Himmel and Hader and then whoever else, right? We haven't seen any other dwarfs or elves, so who knows what that all is all about. Maybe that'll become evident later on. She's like, "Hey, I'm just traveling around. I just wanted to like touch base and see how you're doing." And they talk about Hader's death, the priest. And then she's like, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And he's like, "Yeah, actually there is." Hader had, through his research, found the resting place of Frieren or whatever, right? And this is where, and it's in this giant tree in this forest, so we got to go find it. And she's like, oh, but the documents are all fake. And he's like, no, this one's actually for Rizzle. And she's like, huh. And then Fern's like, that's a waste of time. And then Friren's like, no, if Hader like did the research and believes it, then I trust him. He's very good at research. So we get a little montage of them just searching through a forest and using magic to search and hanging out and having a good time. And then eventually Fern's like, hey, I think that's it over there. There's like a big tree. So they head over to the tree, and then Frieren has like a super flashback, because normally she has normal flashbacks, which are like to her party days when they're like fighting the Demon King and doing all that stuff. But this is like, she remembers like 1,000 years ago. And this is where we learn that this mage who has all the false writings of Frieren or whatever was her master, and she's planting this tree, and she's like, in 1,000 years you're going to come back here and you're going to need access to it, and this tree will protect like my home, because right now it's just like a little sapling, and then there's like her home. And Friren's like, that's ridiculous, why would I need anything, right? Because she's a sass mouth. And then she's like, ha ha ha, ho 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 ho, you'll need it, trust me. And so then Frieren just uses her magic that she already knew to open this whole thing up, and they walk inside, and there's a grimoire there, and the whole point of this, we find out from the dwarf, is that he was, after hearing about like the funeral of Hemel, or seeing the funeral of Hemel and how she was like breaking down and wishing that she could have like gotten to know people better, he's like, you can't get to know her better, because this Philelis lady had like there's writings about how she spoke with the dead, and so you can definitely like find one of her spells or find out how she did it, and then you can talk to Hemel and get to like put that to bed, so you guys can like get to know each other better finally, like you always wanted. And so they open up this grimoire, and they don't even open it up. When they get in there, the grimoire is already open to a page that talks about it. And what the master lady says is that she headed north, and in this area in the north, she was able to do something and enter like the Elysium Fields or whatever they call them in this world, like the paradise, and there she was able to speak to people who are long dead and all this stuff. And so Fern is like, so we just gotta go to this place, where is that? And then Friren's like, it's where the Demon King's castle was built. Ruh-roh, but he's dead. But it's apparently a super long journey, because at some point they talk about it, and the dwarf is like, it's going to take 10 years to get there. And Friren's like, you coming? And he's like, no, I already told you. I'm just going to get in your way of this like long adventure, so good luck. And then he talks to Fern, and they have a conversation while Friren's sleeping at some point, and he's like, is she a good teacher? And she's like, I don't know, something. And then the dwarf is like, sounds like a good teacher to me. And she's like, yeah, she is. Pawecious. So right before the dwarf pieces out, he just checks to make sure Frieren knows where she's going, and they kind of do like a recap. And it's essentially, they're starting like where the adventuring party started, right? Like they're near the capital, because I guess that's around where the dwarf lives. And so they're going to do this 10-year-long journey. And she makes some comment. So she's definitely at least 1,000 years old. I mean, it's been reinforced here, because at some point she's like, this journey was only 1/100th of my life. Which, if you're like a 40-year-old guy or gal, that is like a year of your life in comparison, like relative time, right? So like that 10 years to her is like nothing. It's like a year. It's like, man. And who knows how long elves actually live, but at least 1,000 years apparently. They don't get killed. So, yep. So then Frieren and Fern are off on their journey all the way to the north to essentially recap the hero's journey, which I feel like they've been doing this whole time anyway, but it makes it seem like much more epic. Hey, what's up, everybody? So episode 5 is not a lot happens. We get like a recap at the beginning of like all the previous stuff for some reason. Like, this is the 5th episode. I don't get it. Why the fuck are we recapping? There's nothing to recap. Whatever. Maybe there was a break in the syndicated when it was released in Japan. But it's not a long recap. It's maybe like, I don't know, 3 minutes or something. Then we get the credits, and then we and the recap's just a lot of like, oh, it's 100th of your life. Oh, you're going on a long journey. It's 10 years. Oh, this. Oh, that. Blah 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 blah. And then we have like a very, very, very short adventure. I feel like this is based on a manga, because it might be based on a light novel, but it feels like a manga because the way the anime is going, it's like very short little adventures are popping up. So the first half of the episode, after the very long recap, all things considered, they're in a town and they're like, "Oh, you're not going through the mountains, huh?" People keep going there and then disappearing and never coming back. And then Frieren's like, "Oh, okay, cool, thanks. We'll go check it out." And Fern's like, you know exactly what's going on. And Frieren's like, "Oh yeah. I mean, I've obviously been here before." And what it is these like poltergeists. And what they do is they like read your mind and pretend to be something close to you, and then they lure you to like your death, essentially like a siren. And she talks about last time she was here, it was like her master begging for her life, and so that wasn't hard to kill her because she was always begging for her life in real life, I guess. The fuck. Anyway. We also get Fern's like having a napopotamus, and she's thinking about Hader, the priest guy, and how he said like, "Oh, if you disappoint Frieren or whatever, I'll come back and haunt you," or something. And she's like, "Oh, so I'll be able to see you soon?" And he's like, "I'll make you a better deal. Go and become the master mage you always wanted to be, and then you'll see me sooner than later." And then she kind of wakes up and is like, "Oh, that was quick." And Frieren's like, "Pardon?" She's like, "Nothing." So obviously when they meet these poltergeists, a Hater is the one that she sees, and he's telling her, how great she is doing as a mage and all this stuff that she wanted to hear while she was alive. And, the whole thing is like she wants to become a great mage so that he knows that his sacrifice to like rescue her and raise her was not in vain. And then Frieren sees Himmel and she's like, "Huh, maybe I have changed." And that's like a comment the dwarf makes in like the recap. That it's only 1/100th of your life, but it's had a huge impact on how you are. And then Himmel's just smiling and says something like, "Go ahead and shoot," and so she does and blows him up, and then that gives Fern like the juice to kill her phantom, and then they're like, "All right, cool, let's go," and that's into that. The second story focuses on, I didn't catch his name, like Schneider, something like that, who is the apprentice of the dwarf, and so he's a human with red hair. He uses an axe, and he's been in like the opening credits, so we knew this guy was going to show up eventually. But what happens is Frieren and Fern are traveling, and they bump into this dragon, and the dragon has a grimoire that Frieren wants. It does something, I don't know. She said what it did, but I didn't like catch exactly what it was. It was some old bullshit. As Fern calls her out and says like, "You really like bizarre magic that's unuseful," and she's like, "No, it's kind of useful." So she's like, "Go ahead, Fern, blow it up." And so Fern casts a powerful spell on it, and the dragon like reflects it, but then like wakes up and is like, "The fuck?" It starts chasing them through the woods, and they escape. And she's like, "We're gonna need a little bit more help." And so they head to the town where this Schneider guy is supposed to be, and they're like walking around looking, and then this old woman approaches them, and they're like, "Hey, Master Schneider is looking for you." And Frieren's like, "Oh, that makes my job so much easier." So they head out there, and the old lady tells the story about how the dragon like came and attacked like 3 years ago, I think. But that Master Schneider, like by himself, like stood up to the dragon, and after they like fought for like 30 minutes or something, the dragon like flew away and hasn't bothered anybody since. And then Frieren's like, "Oh, he must be very strong. This is excellent. I wonder why he's still sticking around and hasn't killed the dragon yet." So they meet the guy, and he's like, "Hey, you got to stop bothering the dragon, something." And then she's like, "Oh, your master sent us. I'm Frieren." And he's like, "Hey, old lady, get out of here," with the kids that he was talking to. And he's like, "Hey, so what's going on? Does he want me back? He's super mad, huh?" And she's like, "No, I just want to kill this dragon and be on our way. And we want to like, help you kill the dragon and then move on out." And we find out this guy's a super coward, and he tells like the true story of the matter. So he did show up to fight the dragon because he's like, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to save these people and kill the dragon." And then he was so scared because the dragon was like destroying buildings in one swipe that he just stood there and didn't move because he was like stunned essentially. And then the dragon like flew off and hasn't bothered anyone since. And so then Fern and Frieren are like, "Huh, that's weird. I wonder why the dragon didn't come back and like kill everybody." Like, it's just like, and then Frieren's like, "I don't know, maybe it was just like bored." And it's just like, whatever. I just want to chill. So I'm sure there's gonna be more with that. That's pretty funny. And then behind this guy, there's this huge like crevasse. There's like a tunnel through like this ridge, not a ridge. What would you call this? Like a plateau. That looks very odd, and Frieren like touches it and thinks about it. And she's like, "All right, so hey, we're gonna go fight this dragon tomorrow, so you should come. But if you're gonna be a coward, then you be a coward and do whatever." And then she goes back, and then they hear some noises later on. And Fern's like, "What's that?" And Frieren's like, "Oh, it's Schneider, probably. You should go check on him if you want. I'm going to bed." And then Frieren has a recollection where she's talking to the dwarf, which this is not like a recollection as in like the retelling of what we already saw. This is like stuff that happened that we didn't see in previous episodes. And he's like, yeah, the guy's a total coward, but I rescued him. His village was being attacked by monsters, and he like ran away, and then I found him, and I trained him up because he reminded me of me because I was a coward at one point. But then I had to become brave, and I did. And so I believe that he'll do the same thing. He just needs like a little push. And then we see Fern. It's like late at night. She walks up to like where Master Schneider is like hanging out, and he's just like using a super axe attack to like cut through the stone as he goes. And she's like, "Oh, he made this." And then he turns, is like, "Nani?" And that's episode 5. So we pick up where we left off with Fern and redheaded guy. Can't remember. Chit-chatting about how he's breaking stone and training and all this stuff, and how he's so scared of the dragon. And he also reveals to Fern that when the dwarf master left him from before, he hit him real hard and like wandered off, and that left like a mark on redheaded guy's conscience or something. So Fern talks to him about the dragon. He's like, yeah, I'll help you guys fight. I got to do something. The village, I owe them, yada, yada, yada. So she goes back, and Fern's laying in bed reading her book, and she's like, oh, did you chit-chat with him? Is he coming? And Fern's like, yes. So then they go there the next day, and he's not there. And they're like, well, oh, well. I guess he's a coward after all. Time to move on. And so on their way to the dragon, the redheaded guy shows back up. He's like, no, I got to do this. Something. And then they walk up to the dragon gets ready to fight, and he's like, you need 30 seconds, right? And she's like, yeah. And so he's like, his hand's shaking, and she mentions it. She's like, oh, your hand's shaking. And he's like, yeah. And then she recalls that the group of heroes, like 100 years ago at this point or whatever, they were fighting this giant red-looking, like, anime monster. I don't know what to call it. Like a JRPG monster that was super red-looking. And then he was going up to fight it, to kind of do a similar thing, and his hand was shaking the exact same way, and she makes a comment about it. Then her and Fern go up to a ledge to watch him fight the dragon, and he starts kind of going at it with the dragon, and Fern recalls something else. And so on the dwarf side, on his version of the story, when he came to like hitting his apprentice, the apprentice guy, the redheaded guy, thought it was because he was a coward or because he was being cowardly or just wasn't good enough trained. And then when the dwarf's talking to Fern about it, like before they split up a little bit ago, he mentions that, I hit him before I left. And she's like, oh, yeah, why is that? And he's like, I was scared. And she's like, what do you mean? It's like, he has potential to be like the most powerful warrior that's ever existed or something. Some line like that, or of all time. And it like freaked me out. And so I had to hit him and leave because I didn't know what to do because I was so afraid of his potential. And Fern's like, And so at this point when he's fighting, Fern gets ready to cast a spell. And Fern's like, no, let's just see how this plays out. And Fern's like, what? And Frieren points out, it's like, he's a lot more proficient than he thinks he is. And so, and then she mentions, like, the dragon didn't run away because he was standing there. He left because he was disappointed because he could also sense the potential in the redheaded guy and he wasn't doing anything. So he's like, whatever, I'm leaving. And so now they're having, like, a grand battle. And finally, the redheaded guy, like, does some super, like, suplex move, essentially, on the dragon with his axe. And knocks dragon to the ground, and then he starts, what are you doing, blah blah blah, screaming at Frieren, and Frieren's like, you need to calm down, and he's like, what are you talking about, you gotta kill this dragon, and she's like, it's already dead, you dummy. And he's like, what? And she's like, yeah, you killed it. And he's like, oh, I killed it all by myself? And she's like, yeah, calm down. And then she goes and like gets her grimoire, and they're looking through the nest and all that, and he's like, wow, I did it all by myself? And she's like, yeah, you got a lot more potential than you're giving yourself credit for, so maybe you should stop being such a bitch. And that's the end. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is now before the end of part 1, she's like, all right, cool, we'll see ya. And he's like, no, I want to travel with you, something. And she's like, you don't want to go back to wherever? And he's like, no. And she's like, all right, I guess you can come along, that's fine. All right, so then part 2, they're at this town that's kind of like on the borderlands, I guess, with like the northern kingdoms or whatever that means. And they're trying to get past, traffic, what is this bullshit? So they need to go north, right, to get to the Demon Lord's castle. And the guards are like, no, we have a checkpoint here. You can't get through. There's too many monsters. We're not letting anybody through that direction until it gets cleared up. And there's like wars going on and all this like crazy stuff. And Frieren's like, okay, whatever. I'm going to go to the magic shop. You guys do whatever you want. And so then redheaded guy and Ferd are like standing there, and redheaded guy's like, "You want to go get something to eat?" And she gives him like a dirty look, and he's like, "Okie dokie." So then he meanders off on his own. And so he wanted. Oh yeah, and then he's eating like ice cream, and he's recalling like when him and his master were here before. He ate they had this ice cream dish, but he couldn't finish it. Because master had to help him finish it, but now it seems so much smaller. And then the bartender's like, "Oh, it looks like you've grown up." And then Fern, meanwhile, she's like standing around. She hears about how the gate's probably going to be closed for at least 2 years, while this whole thing like settles down. And she's like, "That's unacceptable." So she goes and finds him and tells him about it. And they're like, "All right, let's figure it out." So then they go to the Merchants Guild. The Merchants Guild's got no information for them. They decide to go to the Thieves Guild and like they try to find the black market to see like how they're getting goods in and out. And like nobody, this place is like locked down. And at some point he's like, maybe we could just fly over the wall. And she's like, no, they got like a barrier all the way up. And he's like, oh, that makes sense. Well, let's go talk to the guards. There's nothing else for us to do. And she's like, you seem very interested in helping us continue. And he's like, well, yeah, I don't have a lot of time. And it gets quiet for a second. And then she's like, what is that supposed to mean? And he does not answer. So there's something going on there. That's good. Good storytelling. I love it. But then they see Frieren like running and hiding, and they go with her and like, what are you doing? And like these guards are following me. I don't know why. And then the guards like show up, and she's like, ruh-roh. And then the guard like bows down, and then this like marquis or something shows up. He's like, "Oh, the hero Frieren. Someone told me we'd seen you. We're so happy to have you. You're so magnanimous. You're gonna go to the north and like settle this problem with like the remains of like the demon lord's army and yada yada yada." And she's like, okay. And so then they have a giant like farewell celebration where they're like throwing rose petals and like stuff on him. And Farron's like, I really don't like this at all. And then the other two are like, that was super easy. Why don't we just tell them you were here in the first place? She's like, I don't know. I really don't like this. And I wanted to study some magic before we left. So that's pretty funny. And then she recalls they had the same kind of situation when they left the first time, when she was with the crew before. And onward to the north. So the team's back to doing miscellaneous jobs. We open up episode 7 with Frieren and Sharkbait and Fern clearing a pathway in the mountains for a merchant so they can get on to their next area. And the merchant, Shark's like, hey, what are we doing? Why don't we just use your magic to lift this guy up and he can get around? And then Frieren's like, no, that's not really helping people. That's just helping this one guy. And, what we really want to do is make this path open so they can keep using it. And things really don't seem that bad. Like, there was this whole, like, we shut off the north because of war. And then we see virtually no war. We hear it spoken about. Like, in this situation, Shark mentions to the merchant, he's like, this seems kind of odd that the landslide is very small. And the merchant's like, nah, it was probably just, like, some guys fighting and it knocked some rubble into the ground. Like the demons and the humans and whatnot. So this is clearly a problem. So then we go to the town with the merchant, and he's like, there's a celebration. It's a celebration of something, something. We celebrate the heroes that defeated the Demon King, like, over 80 years ago. And then Frieren recalls the whole situation with the statues being built and how she was, like, very nonplussed about the whole situation. But Hemel was like, I want people to remember me when I'm gone. And they got, like, laurels, and people are dancing and stuff. It's, like, really adorbs. And so that's fun. There's also a little period where Fern and Shark are communicating, and Fern, Shark clearly has a thing for Fern, but Fern is like, yes, Mr. Shark, whatever you need. And he's like, hey, we're like almost the same age. Maybe you could be less formal when you talk to me. And she's like, get back to effing work, you doofus. And he's like, okay, maybe you can pull it back a little bit. Tsundere. So that's fun. Or Tsundere. I forgive my pronunciation. So then the second half, so that's pretty much that. We get some like recollections of stuff and flashbacks and yada, yada, yada. It's all good. So then the second half of the episode focuses on this other area they're at, where they roll in, and then as they're walking through the town talking about who's going to do what for shopping and whatnot, Fern sees a demon, and she goes to like kill the demon immediately, but then she gets jumped by the guards. And then the nobleman who's like in charge of this area is like, oh no, they're here for a peacekeeping mission. And Frieren doesn't really open her mouth at this point, but she's like, that's a mistake. They're beasts. And then the demon like representative is like, oh, very interesting. It's him, there's this chick, and there's this guy that looked like smaller than him. And so Frieren gets thrown in jail for 2 to 3 years, and Fern and Shark come to like call her out on it. And she's like, "Look, you can't trust demons." And then she like recalls or tells them the story about how when like back in the day when she was with her original adventuring party and they were doing stuff, that this exact same incident kind of happened where there was like a little girl demon, and she's like, "You better kill that motherfucker." And she quotes her master. Her master being the original. Oh, so we find out that her master, like 1,000 years ago or whatever, she was the one who like introduced magic to like human beings, and that's one of the reasons she's so prolific and why there's so many like fake grimoires, because everyone who can do magic that's human like is like because of her. So that's interesting. Anyway, so back to there's like a demon girl, and she looks all roughed up, and there's this woman and this like screaming about how she needs to die, and they killed her daughter and they shouldn't show mercy. And then like the mayor of the town is like, "No, we got to show we're better than them, because if we kill her, we're no better than the beasts that they are," or something, and she's just a child, and yada yada. And Frieren's like, "You're all gonna regret this, I promise you." And then Himmel's like, "Why don't you just follow her around and see what happens?" And so he follows her around, and she's like doing stuff with like the girl in town and whatnot. And then eventually she burns the mayor's house down with him inside it, and kidnaps his daughter, to give to the woman who's she ate the daughter of. And she's like, "Here, I did this for you." And they're all like horrified. And so Himmel like kills her, and then she's like fading into dust, because that's what demons do, I guess. Frieren's like, "Oh no, yeah." Himmel like cuts her arm off and rescues the girl, and then Frieren like blows a hole in her, and then she walks up and she's like, and the demon's like, "Oh, my mom, where's my mommy?" And Frieren's like, "You don't have a mommy. Like, why'd you say that?" And the little demon girl's like, "Oh, because when we say stuff like that, humans drop their guard and make it easier for us to kill them." So, dope. And so Frieren's like, you can't trust them. Like they learn the language of like their prey. And then we get a shot of the demon talking to like his subordinates about. He's like, "I don't know, that elf girl could really put a like a twist in our plans." And he makes the same comment. He's like, "We learned the language of our prey so that'd be easier to prey upon them. And soon we will have this whole." Oh, and Frieren makes a comment to herself as like the two leave, and she's like, "Well, they're going to destroy this whole village, so I guess I just got to sneak out of here when that happens to be done with this whole bullshit." Dark stuff, man. And so the guy essentially says the same comment, the beast. And he's like, this human tactic of making us wait, that's very adorable. I can't wait to get their guard down so that we can open the gate, we're going to have them open the gates, and then our whole demon army is going to come in and just destroy the whole town and kill and eat everybody. I'm very excited for this. And then the man, the like noble, invites, the envoy to come see him, and he walks in, and then the man talks about how his sword was killed by demons, and how he didn't bring them here to make peace, but to kill more demons. And so he pulls a sword out and is about to stab the guy, and he's like, "Oh yes." And well, he does like a look around the room to kind of see what angle he should take with his like evil words. And what he does is he's like, "Oh yes, I remember my father said, I was recently at his grave, and I was very sad about the whole situation, because this pointless acts of violence towards one another and something." And then the nobleman like stands down and doesn't kill them, and is like, "All right, we can continue peace talks." And then as the demon guy and like the girl are walking away, she's like, "What's a father?" And the envoy's like, "I don't know." So it's all tricks, it's all lies. Frieren's 100% right. Her racism is correct, if you will. It is 100% the correct answer. I love it. What a twist. There's no redeeming demons, huh? Go fig. So then we see, then the demon guy's like, "Hey, where's so-and-so?" And she's like, "I don't know, I think he went to go take care of like that elf in the dungeon." And the guy's like, "Well, that's going to be trouble." And so then we see the other demon guy who wandered off. He's down in the dungeon, and the guard's like, "Oh, we're not seeing anybody down here. You really shouldn't be down here." And the guy just kills him. And then he walks up to Frieren, and Frieren's like, "Hey, visiting hours are over. You shouldn't be here." And the guy's like, "I am an executioner, blah, blah, blah. I'm here to kill you so that we can destroy this town," or whatever. And she's like, "You really want to fight me?" And he's like, "How powerful?" He's like, "You really think you're more powerful than me? I'm like the something of like Aura the executioner or something." And she's like, oh, sweet summer child. "I'm more powerful than the person you serve by a lot." And then that's where the episode ends. Good stuff. All right, now we're getting good stuff. So this episode continues last episode's arc, dealing with the demons. So where last we left Frieren off, the dude meister with the string magic is broke in and threatened her. Then he tries to instantly like behead her, and she blocks it with her magic after she tells him that she's stronger than all of them. And he's like, "Oh, very impressed. Are you able to do this?" And then he's like, "It doesn't matter." And he like lifts her up by the neck with the string. He's like, "I was okay with my magic." And then Frieren's like, that's hilarious. Oh, no, she's like, "Oh my goodness, you got me. What am I going to do?" And he's like, "Aha!" And she's like, "You're retarded." Bam! Dead. Fuck that guy up. And she's like, "All right, cool. So I'm going to go tell the master that this guy tried to kill me and, like the master of the town. And then I'm going to kill these demons and move on with my day." And she steps out and sees the beheaded guard. And she's like, "Woo, boy, that makes things more complicated." We did switch to Fern and Shark, who are enjoying a meal together, and they're talking about what they should do and how they can try to get Frieren out and about the demons and all that stuff. And then they start meandering, and they have like some nice chemistry. And then they start meandering about, and Frieren walks right by him, like completely covered in like a cloak. But Fern catches her. She's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then Farron's like, "Oh, hey, what's up?" And they're like, "How did you get out?" And she tells him that the demon guy, she recalls what just happened. And then she's like, "So I'm going to go." And they're like, "What about the demons in the town?" And she's like, "You guys can take them. You're stronger than them. Don't worry about it." And then she like pieces out. And then there's a whole thing with like Shark being super scared, and he talks about how like the demon guy, the main peace envoy, like when they were talking before, like in the previous episode when they met, he didn't even acknowledge their like existence. He was just staring at Frieren and talking to her. Like normally people will like, you glance at like all the people and then you're like, okay, that person's in charge. But like he didn't even do that. He did not care. They were so below his like attention that it didn't even like register for him to like interact with them on any level. And so he's like really concerned about that, and he's shaky, and they have a conversation about how he's like a coward, so he needs to like buck up and be strong. And there's a lot of art, there's a lot of like subtle storytelling and character building with this guy that is like, mwah. Even though he's super powerful and fast and all this good warrior stuff, he's still like a coward on some level. But he's more like a coward in name only. Because even though he's scared all the time and he freaks out he's like having panic, he has like a panic disorder, like he's scared of being scared, he still like is brave and steps forward and is like very masculine in that regard, which is like, yes, this is excellent. This show is really stepping it up, in my opinion, with these characters. Then we switch over to to the demons, and they're like the pink-haired demon lady. She's like, "Oh, I don't fail Varric or whatever his name is anymore." And then the master's like, "Stupid children getting themselves killed." And the pink-haired lady's like, "Oh, he's such a fool. He got himself into trouble." And then the main guy's like, or not the main guy, the demon, the head of the envoy, whatever his name is. I don't think they had names. I can't remember. They might have said something. He's like, "It was no accident. It was no folly. He just got destroyed by something much more powerful than him." And she's like, "Nani desu ka?" So good stuff there. Then the guy comes in, the master with his guards, and is like, "Oh, so I gotta go check out this thing with the elf. She escaped apparently and killed the guard, so I'll do that." And then the demon guy's like, "We'll help you." And he's like, "No. In fact, where's the other person that was with you?" And he's in the privy, he's in the bathroom. And he's like, "Really? Without knowing where it's at, because he didn't ask any servants where to go." And then the guards all surround these guys, and he's like, "You know what? I think you guys are fucking around with me, and I've had enough." So he pulls out his sword, and then the demon's like, "All right, well, I guess we're done with the pretenses." And he bites his finger, or he bites his hand, and gets blood, and he has like some sort of blood magic where he can create like swords and stuff. So he kills all the guards, and then him and the master guy fight in a pretty short battle where he overcomes him, because the master like cuts him, and then he uses the blood to like shoot him in the side, and then he doesn't kill him, he like holds him to torture because he needs to like undo the magical barrier so that the rest of the demons can come in, which is kind of confusing because it seems like this guy could ransack the whole town by himself, but whatever. He like beat the master of the town and like his elite guard, I'm assuming, and maybe it's just some scrubs like first day on the job and like, oh, sad times, they got killed. We switch over to Fern and Shark, and they're sneaking in. It's like later in the evening, and they're sneaking into the manor, and there's like no one around, and and then we see that. Then we kind of, they're like, "Oh, that's weird. Let's figure out what's going on." And then we switch back to the master and the demons, and the demon. Clearly, this guy's been like tortured and beat up, and they're like, "Well, that crazy lady that 1,000 years ago set up this barrier in the first place, and she's like a genius, and I hate geniuses because the way demons learn magic is by hard work." toiling in the fields of magic to get our magic more powerful over decades. And I hate geniuses because they're just so good, and it makes me so angry. It's like, all right, you got a jealous boner there, I got you. And then we get a little flashback of like Frieren and no, that happens in a little bit later. Okay, so. But his family's been maintaining this barrier, and then they somehow got the demons inside. So clearly, the master has some ability to like affect the barrier. And so they're like, we're gonna go look around and see if we can find anything that will give us a hint. Otherwise, we're gonna come back and torture some more. So think about that. And then once they leave, Shark shows up, and he tries to release the guy from his bonds, but there's like a magical rope or whatever. So then he like bashes the chair, but right then the demons come back in, and then he like calls them out. So him and the demon guy fight. And the demon guy gets the upper hand, but it was all like a trap, because Fern's outside casting Zorik or whatever, that super spell from the one demon, and just rips this guy up. It doesn't kill him, but he's incapacitated. And then the pink hair lady's like, I'll fight you. And then Shark's about to, and then they both kind of like mutually agree to like stand down. And so then Shark and Fern grab the master and jump out the window, and the other demon, the pink-haired demon's like, I'm going to go get him right now. And the guy's like, you probably shouldn't do that. Don't worry about the mage. I'll take care of the mage. You can take care of the warrior. And she's like, I can take them both. And then he's like, that blast would have killed you, so maybe you shouldn't. And he complains, and he's like, that's... Because he was like, incapacitated. He's like, what spell was that? And she's like, Zorik. And he's like, that can't be. That's an anti-human spell, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, well, that's what it is, so suck a dick. Like, damn, Fern, you're badass. And he gets very upset about all this, and he's like, I'm going to take care of that. Meanwhile, and there's like 2 shots of this, but Frieren, she gets outside the manor, and she's like looking at the barrier, and she's remembering like 1,000 years ago when her master, Frieren, whatever her name is, was like invented the barrier and like was using it to protect she literally just used it to protect like a budding flower in like a snowfield. But now it's protecting this whole city, and like the demons over like the last hundreds of years have never been able to like get through it, or thousands of years. And then we get some shots of like the executioner lady with her army, because Frieren's like, someone's watching us from over there. And so she goes out, and then she makes some comment. She's like, this lady. I'm so excited to go fuck her up. And then, oh man, good stuff. Also, I forgot this. The demon envoy guy is like, he's like thinking about, he's like, that chick who cast that spell on me looks so familiar, and the way she was casting and the way she was moving was very familiar. And he's like, it's that Frieren, it's the demon slayer, because she's killed more demons than anyone in the history of forever. She's the greatest demon slayer. And you're like, damn, Frieren's a badass. Episode 9 here is excellent. It's mostly battles, so there's not much to talk about. So we have Frieren. She goes and confronts, or she was confronting the executioner lady, Orca, or something, at the end of the last episode. And Orca's got a whole bunch of, like, I don't know what to call them, Hollow Knights? Not like the video game. Literally, like, so she has a power, and this gets explained to us later on by the master guy, the Duke, or whatever title he has, where her ability is she's got some artifact. It's like the judgment thing. It's one of those, like, old merchant balancing things, like what Osiris would use to like weigh the heart of somebody who's in the afterlife. Wait, was it? It might be Anubis. Anyway, one of those guys. So you put like weights on one side and you put gold on the other side, and it tells you like how much the gold weighs, and that's how they determine like you get paid. It was used up to like very recently as like a scale. Yeah. So she has that ability, and what she does, she weighs her soul against the soul of somebody else, and if her soul is more powerful, then she takes possession of that person. And that there were some knights who were able to fight back against her, but eventually they no one's been able to have like a meteor soul in her that she's used this power on. So clearly this is how Frieren's going to defeat her. But for now, Frieren's just killing a bunch of her. She's releasing the souls of a bunch of these like knights that she's possessed over the years. And then they have like a conversation about it too, because they have fought before, and so the executioner lady's like, you're wasting a lot of mana like releasing their souls instead of just blowing up the armor like you did last time we fought. And then Frieren's like, yeah, Hemel gave me a hard time about that last time. And she's like, oh, what do you care about that guy? He's dead. He's in the ground. And Frieren's like, that's fair. And then that's the last we see of Frieren for this episode. The rest of it, like I said, we go back, and Stark, I feel like I hear his name different every single episode. I thought it was Shark. No, I think it's Stark. Something like that. We're just going to say it was Shark. So Shark and Fern are talking to the master. They're at some church, And he's like, I got to go get Frieren so she can come back and defeat these demons for us. And Fern's like, that sounds good. And she's going to go and like get the guards together to like evacuate the town just in case the barrier comes down and they have to, the town gets destroyed. Meanwhile, the Duke is hanging out in this church, and the priest promises them that there's a shield over just the church that's the same as like over the whole city. So if the city one falls, the church will still be like protected somewhat. So the demon, and even so, the demons can't. They got invited into like the town, but they are not invited into the church, right? Because they're vampires. That's no, just it's the barrier stopping them. So the barrier will keep them out. So that's fun stuff. Where do we go to next? Yes, and so Fern and Shark head out, and they have a conversation because he's like all jacked up. He's got blood coming down, his hands all bandaged, and then he's like, "Hey, where'd you get this blood from?" On her robe, and then she looks at his arm and notices that there's blood where there shouldn't be either, like not where his wound is, and so she takes her robe and like tosses it off, like this purple robe she has, and she's just in like her white underrobe. And he's like, "What?" And he's like, "Nani desu ka?" And then like Pink Lady comes and like hits him real hard, and then like white haired demon guy comes and uses some blood magic to pin her up against the wall, and so it's like, ruh-roh, they found him. And if you remember, I don't know if I mentioned this, so maybe you don't remember. The white-haired demon guy made some comment to her about like putting his blood on them so he could track them or do something, because that's like his power is blood magic, right? And so then while Shark starts fighting the pink-haired lady who has like an attack very similar to his, which we learned about more in a moment, the white-haired demon starts asking her questions about like, where's Frieren, where's this, where's that, and she's like, I don't know, she left town, she like ran away, and he's like, Frieren wouldn't do that, and he starts like thinking, he's like, what is she gonna do? And he's like, oh, I know exactly what she's gonna do, and he turns his back on her to like go take care of something, and then she like breaks free and like gets him in a position where she can like blast him right in the heart because her staff's like right on his back, and he's like, and she's like, you seem so unconcerned about all this stuff about us, but that's going to be your mistake. And he's like, why would I be concerned? Like, the second you try to cast a spell, I'll behead you or whatever. And then she's thinking, like, only Frieren can defeat me. And so she's thinking, and then she has like a recollection of a time when her and Frieren were training, and she's like, why do you guys make me kill all these monsters? And Frieren's like, oh, it's good for you and stuff. Plus, you're a lot faster at casting spells than I am, so that makes it a lot easier. And she's like, oh, I'm fast. I gotta remember. So I can defeat this guy. I just gotta like out dexterity him. And so then she goes to like blast him, and he goes to attack her, and she blocks that. And then they start having like a mage off where she's shooting like a ton of spells, and he's like, she's not very strong, and I got better technique, but she's like overwhelming me somewhat with like all these attacks. And they go back and forth for a little bit, and at some point he's like, I might actually lose this battle. And so he's like, you get over here. And meanwhile, the pink-haired lady is fighting Shark, and they're like running around. And again, we learned that she learned her like magic ability is that she can watch someone's like battle technique, and that she can then copy it perfectly. She's like, who's that fucking Marvel character? I never liked him. I know he fought the Moon Knight a lot, which is one of my favorite comics. And that was ruined by Disney, much like many things else that Disney gets their grubby hands on. Well, God, it's like Master. I can't remember his name, but it's a Marvel character. He might have been in one of the movies I never watched or shows because they're all so bad now. Anyway, so that's what she does, and so because they battled the dwarf guy in the past, she has like his technique, and at some point she hits him like and knocks him to the ground. So he's like passing out, and he's like recollecting. Oh, and he makes some comment to her that like her attacks just aren't that strong. Like, she has the technique down, but she doesn't have the force behind it. Like the dwarf would hit with like massive force. And so as he's laying there, he has a recollection where he remembers being trained by the dwarf, and they're just hitting each other with sticks, and it's in the exact same position where he's laying on the ground, and he's like, I'm done. And then the dwarf's like, get the fuck up. And he's like, no, master, you hit me too hard, I'm tired. And he's like, you're too strong for me. And the dwarf's like, of course I'm too strong for you. That's not the point. The winner of a battle of warriors is the one who's on their feet at the end of the battle. So just get the fuck up. And then the guy's like standing up yelling at him, and he's like, see, you got back on your feet, you're fine. And he's like, snap, got him. And so then as she's walking back to help White-Haired Demon fight Fern, Shark stands back up, and he's like, we're not done here. And she's like, oh yeah, I'll get you. And so they have like a little more battle battle, and then at some point she hits him like in the side or in the leg or something, but it's not enough to like incapacitate him. And he's like, "Aha, gotcha! Your force is definitely not the same as my master's." And she's like, "Nani desu ka?" And he uses lightning strike and destroys her. And then we go back to Fern, and the guy's like, "Oh fuck!" Like as soon as he senses the other girl dead, he's like, "Ah, fuck me." And then Fern uses like a super anti-demon attack and just blows him away. And he's like, "Fucking humans." Or he's like, "Fuck Fern." Fern, what did you teach this monster child? That wraps up episode 9. So episode 10 is another excellent episode in this series. This demon arc situation has really stepped the game up. Everything up to this point was fine. It was decent. This is so good. So this episode, the whole thing's focused. Well, not the whole thing. So we start off with Fern talking to the white-haired demon with the blood magic who is dying. And they're going back and forth a little bit, like their little chit-chat. And he's like, "I don't understand how you could beat me, but it doesn't matter. Something. And then he starts to notice something odd about her mana signature, but it's like too late. And we don't find out what that is until later, but I'm going to tell you now because I'm going to forget to come back to it. The issue is that she's been suppressing her mana at like a low rate, not hiding it completely, but just suppressing it constantly this whole time. And we find out later with a discussion between Frieren and Aura that normally when mages suppress their mana, there's like a way to tell. There's like some fluctuation, or there's some like it's like more hazy. And we see, I don't think I've really seen this before, but this episode spends a lot of time demonstrating the level of mana capability in like this kind of blue aura around people. So the demon's looking at Fern and he sees like this aura that's like barely covering her body. And then he realizes that she's hiding her like true power, and then she like blows the shit out of him. He makes some comment about how he's faced Frieren before and she really doesn't have that good of magic capability. Her mana, like she's a demon slayer, but her mana is like very weak, which is very important for this episode. But then right before he dies, he kind of realizes that like maybe he's misjudged the whole situation. We then go to Frieren and Aura, and they're just standing there, and Aura's like, "I'm gonna use this judgment scale on you, and that's going to give me control over you, and then I'm going to cut your head off, and it's going to be awesome." And then Frieren like thinks a lot about Aura and how she's been alive for like 500 years, and she thinks about how her mana is pretty good because the demon's spending that much time. And then we get a lot of flashbacks in this episode. We spend a lot of time with Frieren and Plume. It's Flume or Plume. I was having a hard time telling what exactly they were saying, but I'm going to go with Flume. So who's her master, right? The redheaded mage who's like the books, and people have made a bunch of counterfeit copies that aren't actually the real thing, but then she found the real thing, and it told her to go north to like rescue the dead people, right? We just talked about this like a few minutes ago if you're watching this thing all the way through and not recording it over weeks like I am. But so we spend a lot of time in flashbacks. We go back and forth from the flashbacks to the present a little bit, but it's a lot of like bouncing around in the flashbacks. And so we see Flume walking into an elven village and talking to herself about how everyone died. And then she sees like one of the Demon King's generals, and he's dead. And then she's like, "You did this." And she turns around and there's like a little elf girl who is Frieren, of course. And Frieren has like a ton of mana, right? And so again, we're seeing this because we see the auras at this point, which we never saw before. I don't think we ever saw before, maybe a little bit, but now it's like very obvious that's part of the point. And then we see Frieren standing next to Flume, and Flume's got a very small mana in compared to where Frieren's at. And Frieren makes a comment about it. And Flume's like, "You're right. You're much stronger than I am." And then she's carrying Frieren on her back out of there, and she's like, "You have a lot of potential. You're gonna be my apprentice." And then all of a sudden she's like, "Hey, do you feel that?" And Frieren's like, "Yes." And so they turn around, and there's these 3 mages, these demon mages, and Frieren makes a comment like, "Oh, they're much more powerful than you." And she's like, "Oh, you're right." And so she sets Frieren down and walks up, and the demons are like, "We're here to kill all the elves, so if you just let us kill the elf, you can go, because the Demon King gave us like an order, and we just follow orders, and then we're going to piece the fuck out." And Flume's like, "Watch this, Frieren," and then she just decimates. like, have you ever seen Slayers? Like, explosion! Or that's kind of super. What is it in Slayers? It's like Dragon Fire or something. I don't remember exactly. That's such a good show, by the way. If you haven't seen Slayers and you like any of this like fantasy anime stuff, you should look up Slayers. It's so good. It's some peak fantasy anime from like the 90s. Oh man, I need to download that now that I'm thinking about it. I don't think I have it in my collection. All right, anyway, I had like the whole thing. It's like 2 or 3 seasons and like some OVAs, and I think I had a movie too. It's so good. It's so fucking good. Anyway, I definitely need to track that down. All right, sorry, I got totally distracted. But then she doesn't just kill the demon; she like blows like a crater in the ground, and then Flume essentially lets Frieren see that her mana is like 10 times, 100 times bigger than like she was letting on, and we get a whole conversation about suppressing mana and how demons are cheaters and liars. You know, they like pretend to say things, and that it's okay to lie to them because we're just making the playing field even, and that you should always use trickery with demons. You should never face them head on. And Flume has a whole conversation about how she's met very powerful mages, and they always think they can like go head to head with demons. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But like, why the fuck would you do that when they're deceivers and they use all sorts of dirty tricks? You might also do the same thing. And it's mentioned constantly, or it's mentioned a few different times. Like the demon at the beginning with Frieren mentions that it's a very despicable and dishonorable way to like exist as a mage. And Fern's like, you bet. And then Flume says the same thing, and then Frieren makes the same comment. Essentially, like they're all like, yeah, it is. It's very dishonorable and disrespectful and like whatever, you know. But who gives a fuck? Like, you don't live 1,000 fucking years. Anyway, so then Flume trains. We did get a lot of scenes of Flume training Frieren to just like hunt things and kill monsters and to be better. And then we see like 50 years have gone by. Oh, but the biggest thing is restraining her mana. And so we get some comments at some point where it's been 3 years and Frieren has kept her mana restrained that whole time. And she's like, you need to spend your whole life doing this. And you spend your whole life not making any scenes, not making any noise until the hero who's going to kill the Demon King comes. And then you need to go kill the Demon King. And then you can live, and then people can celebrate you and you can live like your actual life. Because of that the whole point of Frieren's like existence is to destroy the Demon King from like get-go, planned by Flume. So it's definitely like, it's like, holy shit. This girl lived for like 900 years or 1,000 plus years just to like kill this fucking Demon King, and that like for hundreds of years she just like lived in the forest quietly and like did nothing. Just like got stronger and studied more magic and increased her mana capabilities. Because that's one of the things with demons, they essentially live as long as they can until they get killed, and so they are continuously gaining power. And there's a comment between her and Aura, and that it goes back to that comment that she was making about Aura and how she studied magic for 500 years and how her mana is pretty good. It's not even as good as Flume, to be honest, when we try to compare like the scenes together, but it's very powerful for like a demon, and that's why she's able to control these creatures, and that's why she's able to use this device, because the device measures, it said souls at some point, I could have sworn, and so that's what I said, but it takes like your mana, and it compares mana to mana, and that's why it's easy for her to take control of warriors, because they don't really have a lot of mana. But with mages it's a bit more difficult, because she spent so much time mastering it, she's able to. And because when she looks at Frieren, she sees someone with like very little mana, that it's like even easier for her to just take control of her. And then we go back and we see Flume, who's like, not on her deathbed per se, but she's much older. She looks much older. The animation is fantastic, and Frieren still just looks like a little elf girl. And Flume's like, I've spent 50 years just teaching you battle magic and attack magic and how to kill demons and stuff. And then Frieren's like, do you regret that? And Flume's like, no, and this is where she goes on this whole rant about like, your whole job is to kill the Demon King essentially, and you need to hide yourself. And for 50 years, you haven't like increased you've suppressed your mana, which is like the key to like defeating demons, by tricking them and just not giving them any idea that you exist whatsoever, and that you're like the most powerful mage in the whole world once I'm gone. And then she's like, but I love flowers, and I want you to put flowers by my grave, so I'm going to teach you a spell. And this is kind of where it's implied that this is where Frieren gets like, I just like collecting magic and doing magic for magic, like all these like bizarre spells, or like these little cute spells, like make hot soup or make the best chamomile tea, whatever. This is where she gets that from, because she's such a battle master that all that's left is for her to learn like these quirky spells that are like fun and like actually benefit people's lives. So that's super cute. And then, so then we get to the battle finally after all this. But it's so good. The whole thing is done so well. And, like, Flume's in this story, like, barely at all. And you're, like, really are like, man, she's so badass and cool. Like, holy shit. I wish we had, like, more heroes and more characters like this and, like, stuff just generally. Like, she's such a fucking badass. And so is Frieren. But, so then the Aura's, like, taunting her some more. And this is where we see her aura, and it's like, impressive, and, like, again, like, I'm pretty sure Flume's was better, but it's one of the best we've seen in this episode thus far. It's definitely, like, Frieren's looks very paled in comparison. And so then she uses her little artifact, and then it gets to 2 souls, and then she starts walking toward Frieren, and then slowly Frieren's mana starts, like, being heavier, so more powerful than Aura's, and she starts to get like kind of concerned. She's got like this big sword. She's like, I'm gonna cut off your head. It's gonna be so good. And then Frieren's just taunting the shit out of her, and is like, well, thank you, because if you had actually attacked me with all your soldiers, I might have been overwhelmed. But by you being overconfident, and this comes up a lot. Oh, there's a scene too where Frieren's like, what? Or Frieren's like, hey, Flume, why don't they just hide their mana like we do? And then Frieren, it's so fucking good. And then Flume's like, well, they won't, because that's their status symbol. Like the monsters or these demons, their whole thing is about status, just like humans. But with status, like you see like a rich man, you know he's a rich man because of the clothes and his servants and like his stuff, right? If he just walked around like a beggar, yeah, like a beggar, you would have no idea that that person was wealthy or rich or, you know, well off or anything. So like when they need to flaunt their status, like politicians and stuff, they have like ways of doing it, gold chains, whatever. And so demons are the same way, but it's with mana. So they're not going to suppress their mana, because then they would be killed essentially or they'd be attacked by other demons who think they're weak and they want to like take control of them or whatnot. So they cannot do it just by their pure nature, but we can. And so it goes back, and then eventually the scales decide that Frieren wins, obviously, and we see Frieren's mana, and it's like so fucking big. it's like the screen like backs off a whole bunch, and it still takes up like the whole screen plus some. Like it's so ridiculous, because it's, you know, she's been 1,000 years of like powering herself up essentially, and it's just like so overwhelmingly powerful that it just like crushes this like device, and then Aura becomes completely under control of Frieren, and Frieren's like, kill yourself, and then walks the fuck off. It was so badass. Like, holy shit. I was like, damn, girl. And then Aura like cuts her head off, and she's like, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. But she does it. Damn, girl. That episode was fucking awesome. So with the wrap-up of killing all the demons in town, episode 11 concentrates on two aspects, as usual. We're back to the 2 storylines per episode, at least for now. So the first one, like I said, wraps it up. We have the nobleman shows up with Stark and Fern while Frieren is not praying, but kind of like meditating over like the field of like armored corpses. And then her and Fern chit chat, and it's like, oh, I missed you. And it's like, oh, I missed you too. And then the guy, the Lord, is like, thank you for being so respectful for all the knights and not just blowing them away and all this stuff. And she makes a comment about how Hemel really gave her a hard time for like overdoing it with attack magic. And she's like, so I don't do that anymore. And they're like, good. So some people find the nobleman's son. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but in the previous, like 2 or 3 episodes ago, he brought up that he wanted to kill the demon because they killed his son, and then, you know, that's when the demon used his trickery to say that his dad was killed by humans or whatever, like, which is a complete lie because it doesn't have a dad. I don't know where demons come from. I mean, if they're mammals or reptiles or birds or whatever, they have to progenate from somewhere. So you would technically have a father, unless they just like asexually reproduce. But then so I guess you just have a mother at that point. Anyway, not important. So he finds his son. It's super, you know, nice. And then we have like a cute little, they go back, and the guy's like, everyone wants to celebrate your victory and like saving us. And she asks for the manual from Phelan, or whatever her name is, that, and he's like, you know, it's a fake. And she's like, well, I know it's a fake, but it's got like other shit in there that I want to look at. And he's like, oh, okay. And then because the power of the border spell, well, one, we know that she knows the spell because it was taught to her directly by Phelan. But 2, it's like orally passed down, so they don't write it down. So like the nobleman to like the next nobleman to protect the village and whatnot. He also tells them that they have a conversation as they're. Oh, so then we get a montage of them like partying, which is super fun. We have like 2 montages in this episode. It's kind of funny. So this montage, we just see them eating bread and partying and like hanging out with the people, and then they're leaving, and the guy is like, "Hey, be careful going north. They require you to have a first-class mage." And Frieren's like, "Nani desu ka?" And then Fern's like, what? You don't know about that? Look. And she pulls out her certificate, and she's like a 3rd-class mage. And she's like, I got one. And Fern's like, oh, is that what they do these days? And then they were talking about like, the Council of Mages, and they're all like, you don't know about the Council of Mages? And she's like, it's hard to keep up with you people. And like, you people? No, just kidding. It's hard to keep up with you people, and like you're changing magical requirements all the time. So I just don't. I don't give a fuck. And like, well, that's going to put a predicament in us traveling north because these these checkpoints will not require you to have a first class mage in your party to travel around because of the dangers and whatnot. And so they decide they're going to go to this like magical town in the north over this like mountain range so that they can she can take the test and be like a first class mage, which it'd be hilarious if she failed the test. It'd be so good. Um, so that's all. It's pretty delightful. And they're like, this thing's been around for like 50 years, and she's like, oh yeah, that's like a blink of the eye. Like that means nothing to me. And she pulls out like a prior like certification and like, wow, that's an antique. It's like hundreds of years old. Anyway, so that's pretty funny. So then the next episode, they're traveling north, and the winter starts. Actually, they mentioned winter starting at the previous like part 1 of this episode of episode 11. So then they're in the snow. Stark like passes out from, I don't know, frostbite or something. So then they have to carry him. And then they get to like this lodge, and when they open the door to the lodge, there's this guy with his shirt off doing squats. And then Frien's like, all right, well, let's go find somewhere else to go. And the guy pops out, he's like, wait, you're an elf. And it's like, I'm an elf. And it's like, oh, another elf. This is the first time. That's awesome. And so they all go inside and they start the fire, and then Stark's like about to die, but then they bring him back through like the magic of sleeping in under covers with another naked man, essentially. Now, this is a kid's show, so neither of them are naked, but I mean, that's what you got to do. The Saint. I got to get that in the shed. Okay, I remember now. Anyway, so that was all pretty delightful. And then they realize they can't make it over the mountains because it's like winter and they don't have enough supplies. And the guy has some supplies, but they're going to have to like forage and stuff during this time period. So they spend 6 months in this cabin. This is where we get montage number 2. And the best part about this montage is this elf is a monk. And at first I'm thinking Dungeons and Dragons monk, right? No. He's like a priest, a monk, like a cleric. And so like I forgot his name already. Like their friend, the priest friend from like the past. And so it's fun because part of the montage, we'll see them like cutting wood, gathering berries, like talking. And then we see dinner scenes. And at the dinner scenes, it starts off and it's just the monk praying. And then we see the monk and Frieren praying. And you got to remember, Frieren was raised as an orphan by like a priest. So she's actually pretty religious. And this gets brought up at some point. Like she's very devoutly religious. She might have been praying in that first scene. I was like not 100% like staring at the screen during this part. Like rewind a little bit just to like double check stuff. And then Stark starts praying, and then in the final scene we see, so I think it's Frieren and the priest are praying, then Stark prays in the second time we see it. And again, this isn't like back to back, this is like, then we see foraging and other crap, and then we see all of them like praying. So even though Frieren is not religious or devout or care about the priest, the goddess, because it's a goddess, right, because it's a Japanese role-playing game. So it's always a fucking goddess. All like Breath of Fire, or Dragon Quest, or a lot of these games. Which, yeah, that makes more sense because goddesses are sexy. And gods, meh. Anyway. And the motherly thing, and it's very like Asian. Anyway, we can go into it some other day if people are really curious why that is the case. But that's adorbs. And then we get to the end, and they're like getting ready. It's been 6 months later, and they're getting ready to like pack up and head out their separate ways because the monk was coming like the opposite way over the mountain when they ran into him. And then him and Frieren have like a conversation about his belief and her belief in the goddess, or her lack of belief and why he believes. And he says something, and then he asks about like her disbelief, and she like or he asks about like her life or something, and then she like recalls she had like the exact same conversation with her priest friend when they were traveling to kill the Demon King, like the exact. And then she like smiles about it and is like, no, I don't need you to, because it's something about like, hey, tell me your life story and I'll remember you, because you don't have the goddess to like remember you. And then she remembers like the other priest said the exact same thing, and she's like, no, I already got somebody who remembered me his whole life. And he's like, you got good friends, don't forget that. And he's like, all right, well, I'll see you in a century or two or whatever. I mean, we're elves, so we'll definitely run into each other again. And she's like, all right, adios. And they're like, bye, thank you so much. And Frien's like very grateful because at some point he crafts a like wooden token, like a crucifix, right? But it's not a crucifix in this world. It's like a little lady with wings, but it's not as like the script. It's like almost like a butterfly looking thing. And so that's super adorbs. And she's very grateful because she is very devout and very into the goddess thing, which is interesting because that really hasn't come up before. But again, it's one of those things where she doesn't say anything. It's just like someone else mentions it, and then she's like very grateful to have this like a rosary essentially that she hasn't had in years while traveling with Frieren. So it's very good. It's so good. Like the storytelling in this is so excellent. It's par excellence. yeah, and so then they head on their way. So I'm trying to remember if anything else really occurred. I think that was it. Cool. Episode 12 is another split into two parts. We start off with the crew hiking through the mountains in another storm, not as serious as the ones before. And now that like winter's kind of officially over, it's still snowy high up in the mountains as it tends to be, even here in Hawaii. That's the case, right? You'll still get snow way up in the mountains on the Big Island. Frieren is pretty tuckered out, so Stark offers to carry her with his hands, and Fern's like, "You're a pervert," and it carries her on her back. And she recalls just hanging out with her friends back in the day when they were like all traveling companions. We learned that Himmel, when he was younger, he rescued like a merchant from something, and the merchant gave him the fake hero sword. And that they were on a journey to get the real hero sword, which leads directly into this village in the mountains where they're at. And this village has this young girl who's like the mayor because her grandma was the mayor, and then, the grandma's died because it's been like 100 years or whatever. But the grandma was here last time Frieren was around, and she left the little girl a lot of sayings to tell Frieren when she showed up, because Frieren promised to come back every like 50 some odd years to check on the hero sword, because there's a cave that contains the hero sword. And then she kind of recalls, and then the younger mayor lady, she's like, oh yeah, the king of the monsters, or the king of the mountains, or whatever. And so they go track him down, and they kill a bunch of like monster wolves, and then the big giant monster, Lord of the Wolves or whatever, shows up. And Frieren's like, oh, I've never seen you before. You're not even 80 years old. That means there's no way you could possibly be a lord. And they just beat the shit out of him. Like real quick. And then they're just standing there looking in the cave, and then Stark's like, wait a second, Nani desu? Because the hero sword is there. And they're like, well, didn't you guys come to get the hero sword with Himmel and all this stuff? And she's like, yeah, we did, but he couldn't get it, so it's still here. Like, no one's gotten the hero sword. And then she recalls how, he was kind of disappointed, but Himmel's such like an optimistic, true hero that he was like, you know what, it doesn't matter. We're still going to go kill the Demon King even without the hero sword. And they did. So, they let the legend kind of grow and exist that he did get the hero sword. So, because that's what happens, especially in human society. Like decades, 100 years go by, and people become like mythological when they perform like acts of great deeds, right? You see that with like current, you can see that just looking at like the history in the last 100 years here in the real world, like with Adolf Hitler on the bad side, but then you also have like a JFK or some of these like war heroes from World War I and II that are like these mythical creatures, like Audie Murphy, if you're involved in the army, and not that they haven't done great things, but there's always like exaggerations placed on, or terrible things in the case of Adolf Hitler, but there's always like exaggerations that are placed on things and such. So then Frieren promises to come back in 50 years, and we move on to hanging out in the village. And we find out that it's Stark's 18th birthday, so he's younger than Fern, I think. Because I thought she was 16, but I feel like time has gone by, but maybe she's still 16 or 17, so she's like a year behind. Anyway, this episode, or this part of the episode, focuses kind of, it doesn't focus, you get some hints of their growing, like, affection for each other, particularly Fern towards Stark, because Stark's kind of oblivious 18-year-old guy. Because there's definitely, I feel like this is definitely going somewhere with this, but I could be wrong. So Frieren's like, oh, I got him a present. It's this potion that dissolves the clothing of women. My master told me that men love this kind of stuff. And then Fern throws it or pours it on Frieren and is like, you're a pervert. Cut it. Go get him something else. And then she leaves to go get a present for Stark. And Frieren finds this recipe in her luggage. She's like, oh, that's what I got to do. Then we follow Fern as she follows Stark around the town while he's doing good deeds. And then she tracks him down. He's just like looking at clouds. And Fern's like, Fearon's wrong about Stark. He's not a pervert. And then you hear him talk, and she hears him talking out loud. It's like, oh, that cloud looks like a woman with giant boobs. And Fern's like, oh, he is a pervert. And he's like, oh, that one looks like a giant pile of poo. I better tell Fern about it. And she's like, why would I care about that? And again, he's got the mentality of an 18-year-old boy. So she walks up, and he's like, hey, look at, ooh. And she has like a angry look. And he's like, never mind. And she's like, come on, we're going to go get you something for your birthday. And he's like, oh, wow, really? And she's like, why do you act so surprised? And he's like, well, I've never gotten a birthday present before. Like, my master never gave me a birthday present, the dwarf guy. And then my family never did because I was weak and they valued warriors. And we do a flashback with him. He remembers his brother who was like the top warrior in the village. And then he was like much younger, and his dad didn't like him and his mom didn't like him because he was like weak. But his brother like took good care of him. And then at some point his village got attacked by the demons, and his brother's like, hey, you need to get out of here and live and become strong. And so he did. But he feels sad about that, and he's talking about that a little bit with Fern. And then Fern ends up getting him like a bracelet or something. There was like these rings, and he's like, "Oh, can I get this one?" And she's like, "Too expensive." And then we go back to the inn, and Frieren has made him like hamburger steak, like these giant hamburger steaks. And he's like, "Wow, that's what my master always used to give me." And she's like, "Yeah, that's like the." And then she tells him, like, "Yeah, I was talking to your master," and she has a recollection, but obviously she's telling him this too. He was telling me that that's what you do to warriors on their birthday, is you make them hamburger steak as like their birthday present. And so his master did give him a birthday present every single year. He just didn't realize it because he was a child. And it's like, here's meat. And then he remembers his brother made him hamburger steak once too. So he did get a birthday present. And so the whole episode's like, oh, it's so sweet. Like he goes from like this very sad, oh, mopey me, to like, oh wow, there's a lot of people that loved me and like took care of me, like my brother and my master and Frieren and Fern, and it's pretty good stuff. And then Farron's like, ooh, look, I saved some of that potion. And he's like, ooh, what's the potion do? And she's like, you're a pervert. He's like, I don't even know what it does. And that's that's episode 12. So this next episode starts off with Frieren talking to some guy, and the guy's telling her this crazy story about how he had a best friend, and the best friend of him grew up, and the best friend wanted to go on adventures. And then one day, when they were older, the best friend was like, "All right, let's go." And he reached out to take his hand, and the guy whose name is Zane, was like, did not take the hand. And then Farron's like, "Why are you telling me this story? I don't even know who you are." And he's like, "Because I want you to take my hand and help me get out of this poisonous swamp." When she's like drowning in like quicksand. And she's like, "I don't know. I have to think about it." He's like, "What do you mean? You don't want to save me? Like, what do you have to think about?" She's like, "Your hand's really dirty. I don't really want to do it." Oh my goodness. Excuse me. And then Fern wanders up and she's like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "You won't save me." And Farron's like, "I'm thinking about a spell. I gotta remember what it is to pull you out of there because I'm not gonna grab your hand." And so eventually she remembers and she pulls him out, and they are heading to this village. And the guy's like, "Well, thanks for helping me out. Do you want to come? We're having like a harvest festival." And they're like, "Nah, we're good. We're gonna go to this next town and get and like resupply." And he's like, "All right, well, just be careful out there. There's lots of poisonous animals." And they're like, "Yeah, gotcha." And then Stark immediately gets poisoned by a snake. And Farron's a mage, so she doesn't have any like antidote spells or healing magic or any of that stuff. So she goes to... Oh, so they fly him back to the town where they're at, and they go to the priest there. And the priest is like, "Oh, he's dead. His brain's going to melt, and he's going to come out of his nose, and there's nothing you can do about it because this is like a deadly poison, and it can be treated like at the moment of impact, but at this point it's too late." And he's like, "No." And he's like, "Well, and then the priest is like, "Well, my brother might be able to do something about it." And then Zane walks out, and he's like, "What's up, homies?" And he's like, "Hey, can you heal this guy?" And then Zane walks up and heals him like immediately. And it's like, "Cool, catch y'all later." And so he leaves. And they're like, "Wow, that guy's like a really good priest for being like a jackass." And then Frieren points out that the brother priest has this medallion that's like the top award to like one of the top priests in the province or whatever. And and the guy like reveals that it was given to him by Hader, the priest companion that Frieren traveled with. And that, even though he's pretty good, his brother's like excellent. And he just tells a story about how their parents died, and he kind of had to raise his brother. His brother's like a hellion, but that he's got this natural talent for like priestly magic, and that but he's kind of like a rambunctious young man, and that ever since his friend left on the adventure, he's been kind of like even more, kind of not bothered, but he's been a little more like out of sorts. And that he requests like, "Hey, if you don't mind, can you take my brother with you and venturing out of this town? Like, I chose to be here for various reasons, but this is not the life for him, and he's just kind of like cycling this kind of like somewhat depressive state, being miserable, just kind of hanging out here." And so Stark's like, "I'll go find him." And ask him, because Farron's like, "I don't know. He's kind of creepy." Stark's like, "No, we need a priest. We're gonna do it." And so he goes downstairs in the inn, and Zane is gambling and drinking, and he's like, this is like complete decadence. And the guy's like, "Whatever." He's like, "I want you to join our adventuring party." And then Zane's like, "Well, if you beat me at cards, I will join your party." Then we hear some like yelling, and Fern and Frieren wake up and come downstairs, and they find Stark like naked and on his face on the ground, and like, "What happened to you?" And he's like, "Well, I tried to get him to join, and then I lost all my money, and I got thrown here." And Zane's like sitting there too, also naked. And he's like, "Me too. It was the mayor. He's so good at cards. he robbed us both blind." And so Fern has to go back to the mayor, and the mayor just gives him all the stuff and is like, get that guy out of here." And so we get a little montage of like them walking around and kind of trying to get Zane to join their party, and we get him like talking about like, oh, the adventurers kept like bothering me and being around. And they stuck around for the Harvest Festival, and they were doing all this stuff, but I'm not gonna go. I refuse. So then Frieren and the crew go back and talk to the brother some more, and like, what is he into? He's like, well, he likes drinking and gambling, and they're like, yeah, we know that. What else? And well, he really likes older women. And then everyone looks at like Frieren, and she's like, fine. So then Zane comes in and says something, and then leaves, and then they chase him out, or chase after him. And Stark's like, hey, I hear you like older women. He's like, oh yeah, I love them. He's like, we got a older lady in our adventuring party, and he's like, where? And then Farron's like, me, I am an elf. I am much older than you. And he's like, well, yeah, I know you're an elf, like, whatever. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm going to use my secret seduction technique. And she like blows him a kiss. And it's this like really ridiculous scene. And the priest just looks at her, and then like Fern and Stark are like, it's so like sensual. And the guy's like, what? No, I'm not falling for that. Oh my gosh. Excuse me. And then Farron's kind of put out because she's like, oh, that worked so well when I used it on Himmel. And we get a flashback of Fury using it on Himmel, and Himmel like passes out because of like the seductive power of it. And this is a technique she learned from Thalen, her master, like 1,000 years ago. And he's like, look, I mean, you don't look like an older woman. Like, you look like a child. So I'm good. I'm going to go. And then they have like a very in-depth conversation. And eventually, he's like refusing. And then his brother walks up and gets really mad because at some point Zane's like, I'm sticking here because I'm going to be with my brother because he sacrificed to be with me, so I'm going to do this. And my friend who left, he'd spent 10 years and he never returned, so he's probably dead, and yada, yada, yada. And then finally the brother, and then Frieren keeps being like, 10 years is nothing. He could still be around. You're going to, as years go on, you're going to regret more and more not going out to look for him, even if he's dead. And then finally the brother like has had enough, and he walks up and slaps him in the face and is like, you need to go adventuring and stop being such an asshole. And and then we get the crew, they're like fishing and reading on the side of the river later in the evening. And Zane comes up, he's like, all right, you won. I'm coming with you. I've never seen my brother so mad like in my entire life. Like, this really means a lot to him, and that sounds good. And then Farron's like, good. It's good to have you. Episode 14 is a very sweet episode. And I don't mean that as a pun. It's literally like, oh. So the two stories are kind of just an extension of the same story. We see that Fern is super pissed off at Stark, and he like goes off because she's being super mean to him. And then Zane and Frieren are talking about how it's Fern's birthday and that Stark didn't have anything for her birthday, and that she's super upset. And then Zane is like, I don't get anything for her birthday either. And she's like, I don't care about that. And it's obviously because they're building this like romantic tension between Fern and Stark, which they have been for a while, which I've mentioned before. It really comes to like roost here. So they have like some talks about that, about romance and about stuff. And then they're both like, Zane and Frieren both are like, you need to go apologize for being mean and like see what's going on. And so Zane's like, oh, I need to go get your birthday present too. So he goes out and he's like looking at stuff and trying to figure out what to do. And then she bumps into him, and they have like another conversation. And essentially he's like, he's a dumb guy and we're guys and we like forget stuff and whatnot. But it's, what's the intent? And then she tells him, well, last year they went and got like a birthday present for her together. And he's like, you probably want to do the same thing, which he did. And you're overreacting. So she essentially tracks him down, and he like apologizes and tells her like that. He's like, I just thought we would go together, and then you got so mad, I didn't know what to do, and I'm a dumb like 18-year-old kid. And she's like, that's okay, let's go shopping together. And then they do. And they go shopping for, quote later in the second half of the episode, over 3 hours before he finds her a present. He's like exhausted from it. But she's wearing it like the whole second half of the episode and like making a point of it. Meanwhile, Frieren's like, what do you call it? Stalking them from the rooftops and watching, and is like, oh. And then Zane's there too, and she's like, and he's like, you're stalking them, and she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, hey, whatever. And so then they chit chat about that for a little bit, and they chit chat about how Fern went to him for advice instead of her, and she's like, well, yeah, of course she did, because you remind him of Hader, who's like the priest. And he's like, oh, that guy, no, I'm nothing like that guy. He was so righteous and pure and stuff. And she's like, he was dead. Like, he would drink, and when he wasn't drunk, he was hungover, and he would like gamble. Like, he's an extremely corrupt priest. And then Zayd's like, wow, that's not the guy I met. And then we get like a flashback of her talking to Hader when he's like old, and he's just talking, and she's like, wow, you became like a really respectable person. And he's like, well, no, not really. I'm the same guy with the same mental attitude as when I was younger. It's just, when I had, as you get older, you like mature a little bit, but also you just, the responsibilities, and, you gotta like take care of stuff. So like, Fern, for example, needs an adult. So I have to be an adult, even if I don't feel like being an adult, because I got to take care of her. And then, they talk about like, who's going to take care of you? And he's like, well, the lady who's taking care of me, I'll see in heaven. And when I get to heaven, I'll pray for you. I'll ask her to, watch out for you, and I'll see you there. And Farron's like, sure thing. And, and then they have some comment about who's watching out for you here, or who's going to tell you did a good job here. And he's like, oh, nobody. And she's like, pats him on the head, and she's like, there you go. You did a good job. And he's like, wow, that was surprisingly satisfying. And so we go back to the present, and she's like rubbing Zane's head, and he's like, what are you doing? And then he's like, and then he's like, well, this isn't actually that bad. If you were like an older woman, this would be totally my thing, because he's into like MILFs or whatever. And she's like, well, good thing I'm the oldest woman you're ever going to meet. So that's the end of that part. So in the second part, they're traveling, and Frieren is commenting on Fern's bracelet. She's like, oh, that's a nice bracelet. It's very pretty. And then she's like, yeah, start cut it for me. And he's like, oh, 3 hours or whatever. And she's like, I think I have a ring with that same symbol on it. And they're like, really? And like, so she starts looking, like Himmel gave it to her. And then they get attacked by like a rock, like a giant bird, who picks up the caravan, the carriage, the wagon that they're in, and starts carrying it off. And then they're talking about how they're going to escape from that situation. And they're like, can't you just fly us out of here? You're wizards. I'm like, well, actually, flying magic is derived from demon magic, and no one really got to like the root of how flying works. So like, really, you can just do people, and you can do bigger objects, but it's like very limited. And I'm like, man, you guys are like floating shit all the time. What are you talking about? But I guess when you're talking about flying is different than just like floating or levitating or like moving things short distances. So then they're like, well, maybe you could figure it out. And she's like, yeah, maybe I need some time to like think about it and like consider how I would do this thing. Cause otherwise we just got to grab everybody and fly off. And then Stark can just jump from really high. And he's like, I'll die if I jump from really high. And she's like, well, the dwarf, I think Eisen, I finally caught like the name. He could jump from extremely high heights and he would always be fine. And they're like, oh my gosh, that guy. And again, he's a dwarf. So I'm sure that has something to do with it. But so finally they decide they're going to give it a shot. So she hops out, blows the head off the rock, and then everyone falls in the wagon. And Frieren like grabs it at the last minute so they don't die, but the wagon doesn't get destroyed. Like the horse gets injured, but he's fine, and everyone's okay. But they have to like repair the wagon before they can continue on. And so we get some like montage of everybody like cutting wood and working on the wagon and collecting food and hanging out. And they spend a decent amount of time doing that. And then at some point, Zane, and Fern and Stark are all kind of hanging out, and then Fern like yells at him about something, and so he kind of like goes, and then Zane grabs him, and he's like, "Hey, that bracelet, that's really intense stuff. Like, good call." And he's like, "What do you mean?" It's like that symbol is like the mirror lily or the mirror something, and it represents eternal love. And he's like, "What?" And she's like very happy about that, because she's like listening into them. Fern is. And so then he comes back, he's like, oh, hey, you heard all that. Sorry, I can take it back. And she's like, don't you ever. Like, it's very precious to her because obviously she has a crush on this guy. And so that's cute. And then we learn that, and then she goes, and then, we see a little bit more of them like preparing stuff and doing whatever. And then they're about ready to go, like one more night. And then Frieren's like off, like picking up berries and looking in the woods. And then Fern comes up. She's like, what are you doing? You keep sneaking off at night, like looking around. What's going on? And she's like, oh, nothing. I lost that ring that Himmel gave me. I just want to see if we get it, but we can just leave. It's not a big deal. I've lost lots of things. And then Fern's like, no, that's a big deal, because she understands like the meaning of the symbol at this point. And so Fern's like, and then Fern's like, no, it's really, he's giving me lots of other things. Like I lose stuff all the time, like 1,000 years old. Like it's really not that big of a deal. And so then they go talk to the caravan guy, the guy driving the wagon. And he's like, oh, I just happen to have a scroll with a magic spell on it that is to find lost items that are like rings and shit. How convenient. I was going to give it to you as like a reward for repairing my wagon and helping me out, but you can have it now. And so Frieren finds the ring using the magic, and then she's like holding it and thinking about because then Fern mentions like what it stands for. It stands for eternal love. And she's like, oh, Himmel gave it to me. That's interesting. And then so they're all sitting there in the wagon going along, and she's like, has a flashback to, it was, Himmel's like, I want to get you a present for helping us out with like all this stuff. And he's like, so choose any ring you want. And she's like, ring hound, rather magic item. And she just grabs like the first one. She's like, this one will work. And he's like, are you sure? And he looks at it and he kind of smirks because he knows a lot about flowers. We've learned previous episodes. And he's like, all right, yeah. And then at some point he's like holding it in his hand. It's like later on. He's holding it in his hand and thinking about it. And then he like takes Frieren's hand and gets on his knees and puts it on her hand, right? And so essentially he's like proposing marriage. And at the time, she was just like taken aback a little bit, but now she's like thinking about it and she's like smiling because it's like, oh, interesting. Because she definitely has like some feelings for him, as much as like we learn that like elves, from what she's mentioned before, are really not that sexual creatures, which is why they're dying out because they're just kind of like, eh. But you know, like being with the humans and the dwarf and having these friends and these experiences have kind of like given her like more of that human emotional aspect, and so it's kind of interesting. See where that's going to go. Episode 14 focuses a lot on the side characters. Frieren still, you know, is excellent, awesome. But in the first one, we're going to focus in on Zane. So the party continues to travel, and they get into kind of an argument about Zane's like, you know what this party's missing? And Frieren's like, what? And he's like, a beautiful older lady. And then Frierin's like, well, we have Frieren. And he's like, oh, no, she's more like an old child. And Frieren like, shut up. But then they run into this village and everyone's asleep. And why are they asleep? Because they've been cursed. So then we learn in this world that curses are magic that is unknown, that is usually done by monsters. So there's different classes of magic. There's like the magic that's known, that's like the wizard magic. There's curses, which are like monsters magic that, you know, human magic doesn't really understand what's causing it, whatever. It's calling something a curse in this world, the way it's described, is essentially being like, we don't know what causes this, we don't know what kind of forces are involved, and it's not really our purview necessarily, so we're going to just call it a curse. So anything like is not understood when it comes to magic, and it's not related to demons or the church, is curses. All right, so then we have demon magic, and demon magic, some of it's being learned and some of it's not learned, so because it comes from like a different place, but it's easier for the magicians or like the magic users, the human magic users / the elf, to kind of like figure out what's going on with the demon stuff and replicate it or make protections against it, as we have seen previously in this show. And then the fourth class of magic is the priestly magic, the magic that comes from the goddess. And that's the magic. Some people are born with a predilection towards that, and those people are born with like a natural resistant to curses, and they also can dispel curses and they can do all this stuff. So Zane, and with the healing magic and such. So we have Zane, right, as the priest. So thank goodness he's here, because he's like looking around and trying to figure it out. And Frien's like, so can you cure the curse? And he's like, not really. It'd be easier to destroy the source. And it's like that direction, so let's get going. So they start to get going, but almost immediately Shark like passes out because he's affected by the curse. And so they carry him with magic, and then when they get like closer, then Fern passes out, right? Because she has some protection against it being a mage and whatnot, I guess. And then so they put like a bubble of protection around them and like some blankies so they can stay warm. And then Frieren and Zane continue onward. And then right before they get to like the monster that is causing the curse, Frieren's like, hey, don't fight this thing by yourself. Make sure you wake me up. Because at some point he said he can wake people up, but it's only going to be for like 5 seconds before it's going to, you know, with the tools he has. And that's kind of the issue, is that, yeah, he could break the curse, but he doesn't have the tools. So it's better to just kill the monster, the source of it. And he's like, well, okay, I can still destroy the monster. I have some offensive capabilities. So he goes, and it's a giant flower, and he describes, I can't remember exactly what he calls it, but it's like a demon plant or whatever. It like comes into areas and like attaches itself to like the local flora and kind of like shapes itself like that, and then it kind of curses the area. So he starts to fight it, and his spell gets reflected, and he's like, ruh-roh. And then he's running away, trying to figure out what he's supposed to do, and he's concerned about waking up Frieren, even though she said, wake me up and I'll destroy it, because her magic's so much more powerful. So if she hits it and it reflects the magic, because it has reflection powers, it'll like destroy the area because she's so strong and her magic's so powerful. And then he recalls talking to the old priest, and about when him and his brother were kids before they kind of became into the priesthood, and he was talking about his adventures with Frieren, and he mentioned that I never fully like. It's not that he says something about like there was never like an immediate trust that he felt necessary. It's not. What did he say exactly? It's something along the lines of, because Zane's concerned, because the whole pretext of this part of the episode is that he's new to the party, he's trying to get to know them, he doesn't necessarily trust them, or doesn't feel that Frieren trusts him necessarily. But then when he's recalling this story, the guy says something about like, there wasn't, there wasn't necessarily a need to build trust because I trusted her immediately. Like when she told me she was going to destroy the Demon King, at first I laughed it off, but then I was like, you know what, maybe so I should just trust her and see what happens. And then she never let me down. And so he's like, all right, well, she told me to wake her up, so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to, I don't know if there's enough time to tell her about the counter magic, but here we go. So he casts his his awake spell, and she wakes up, and right as he's about to tell her about the reflection curse, she casts this super powerful attack that swoops around and comes at the flower from behind or whatever and destroys its core, killing it. And then she makes a comment. She's like, "Oh, as soon as I woke up, I realized I had reflection magic." So he clearly could trust her the whole time. So that was cool. And then we get a little bit with Fern and Shark, where he wakes up and he's leaning against her, and he's like, "Oh, that wasn't so bad." So the village is very grateful, and there's a beautiful older woman that is super gracious, and then the priest is like, "Oh man, she was so hot. I wish we could have stuck around longer." Wah wah. So part 2 of the episode, the party gets to the halfway point, and there's this kingdom, and immediately they get accosted by the king or whatever he is, the duke, baron, whatever. Because Shark looks like his dead son. Again, this whole area has still got demons and the remnants of the Demon Lord's army and whatnot. So they had a huge melee with a demon army, and his son died killing the commander of that army, but his son died. And so they need time to recuperate their forces and build up their defenses again. And so they need to show strength. It's a morale question. They need to show the surrounding kingdoms and everybody that hey, they're still strong, they're still going well. And the only people who saw his son die were him and a few very trusted people. And Shark is identical to him. And we find out that the lineage of this kingdom came from the warrior village that Shark's from. So that's why there's so many similarities. And again, people who are not intimately familiar with the prince, essentially the dead prince, would just see Shark with the similar traits and his red hair and stuff and just assume. So they agree because of Fern's nah, we're good. But then they agree because they're completely broke and they need money. And so then Fern and Zane and Frieren enjoy the life of luxury, eating, drinking, and being merry, while from dawn to dusk for 2 months, Shark has to train to be a noble. So he's doing dance lessons, and he's doing all this, and he's learning how to hold the sword correctly because he's an axe guy. And we learn that the king loved his son very much, but then they got into a fight before he left, and he's very sad about that. But he's got another son who could be the heir, and he's not as talented as the older son. But unlike in Shark's situation, remember everyone treated him poorly. This prince gets treated very well, and he gets told constantly that hey, you may not be as naturally talented, but you can be better because you just got to work hard and train. And so it's a similar situation. There's a lot of connections where it's this is a similar situation to Shark growing up, but much better for the younger child. And then there's a whole thing where it's him and this guy kind of get close, but at some point he's you're not my dad, and he's oh, I know you're not my son. That's not what we're trying to say, but if you ever need a place to crash when you're done, you're welcome to come back here. And at that point, Shark's no, I need to go. I had a fight with the guy who raised me, right, the dwarf, and so I need to go back and apologize and make amends with that. And he's, the king's I understand. Anyway, so at some point, so it's 3 months before this party that he has to show, and that's what they're getting paid for, to put on a good show. But he needs a date, so that they bring Fern in, and this, it's very cute. It's the whole thing with Fern and Shark. They're eventually guaranteed to get together, or there's gonna be some very tragic thing going on. But they, they definitely like each other, and it's secret tea, and they're Fern's a stubborn, and Shark's kind of dumb, so it's delightful all around. And so we get some shots of Fern learning how to be a proper lady and dance and all this stuff too. And, there's a couple of moments between the two of them when Shark practices being very gentlemanly to her. And she's very ooh, I like that. And then they're at the dance and he's well, we're here and we know how to dance. We might as well dance. And they have a very fun little dance. And Frieren and Zane are watching them. And they're very happy and connected, and it's very sweet. And, it's definitely bringing them closer together, doing all this stuff together. So I'm excited to see where this goes. The show so far, the show reminds me a lot of, I lost it. Oh, Violet Evergarden, which I might need to rewatch because I watched it a long time ago, but I never made any commentary about it, so I can get the record straight. But that is one of the best shows I've ever seen in my entire life. It's so good. It's this. It's there's nothing about it that's man, fucking Dragon Ball Z, excellent. I love watching that shit. It's fantastic. Bro Town. It's more I just watch it, and every time I watch an episode, I'm this show is so excellent. All the praise I heard about this show, Frieren, same thing with Violet Evergarden. It's it's just the story is so good, and it doesn't need to do anything. And this show, I don't know if it's better. because it's got like fighting in it. Well, the other one kind of, but not really. But it's just like the characters are so rich and all the interactions and just like it's like going somewhere, but it's like taking its time and you're enjoying the adventure. It's very comforting in that regard. While like something like more shonen-y, like a Dragon Ball or a slime like Rimuru. At that time, I could turn into a slime, or some of these other kind of like isekai ones, or even like the fantasy ones, like the Is It Okay to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, are like awesome. They're like more brotastic. Well, something like this is just like quality, period. Like if I could convince my wife to watch anime, which she like refuses to do, I think she would enjoy this. But yeah, so that's an episode. It's very good. Episode 16 starts off with Zane remembering fishing back in the day when he was a kid. And his best friend comes along and says, "Hey, there's an adventurer here. He's going to take a picture of us." And he's like, "What?" And I was also like, "What? Is this an isekai?" No, it's like a magic spell. And there's a mage that comes and takes a picture of him. And he has the picture in like a locket that he carries around with him. We get back to that in the second part of the episode. But in the first part here, Frieren is like very excited because she's going to meet an old friend of hers. It's an old dwarf who's been alive for like 400 years or something. And most dwarfs, I guess, only live 300 years, someone makes the comment. And so they come up and they find this like super old looking dwarf guy just kind of like huddled over on the side of the road. And Frieren's like, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "Oh, who are you? Something, something." And then Shark's like, "Hey, this old man doesn't remember anything. He's like senile." And then the old man like knocks him on the ground. And then he's like, and then Frieren's like, "Oh, teehee, you. Why are you always playing tricks?" And then he essentially chews out Shark, and then Frieren wants to stay for a decade and hang out with her buddy, but Fern convinces her to only stay a week. So they do a lot of chores for like all the people in the town and help out, while Shark is getting trained by this great warrior, right? Because he's like 400 years old and he was super great. And he's defended this town from demons like by himself for hundreds of years. And at some point, him and Fern are just kind of chit-chatting, and he makes some comment about Himmel, the hero, and she's like, "Yeah, I mean, you're the one who kind of inspired me to be closer and learn more about these guys and actually make them my friends." And then they recall, like, 100 years ago or 80 years ago, whenever they were here before, when she was here with her old companions, Hader and the dwarf, and like Eisen, I think his name is, and Himmel, and he's explaining that, like, this back when I was an adventurer and I was married to a human, like, this is my wife's like favorite village, and so I swore to her when she died that I would always protect it, and it's been like so long, but I'm always going to do that. And then at some point he mentions that, like, I can't even remember like what she looks like anymore, and then he makes some comment about how he's like, "So you still on the way to go kill the Demon King?" And she's about to say like, "No, I already killed the Demon King like 100 years ago." But she recognizes that, like, he's getting old and he's going to die, and so she just kind of sets it, leaves that be, and it's just like, "Yeah, that's why I'm here." He's like, "That's good. That'll make me happy." And they reminisce a little bit more, and it's very sweet. And they talk about, she shares some like very nice, touching things about how like she will remember Himmel forever and the rest of her companions, and and then he's like asks her about it and stuff like that. So it's very nice. Then the next day comes and they're headed on their way out, and it's like a final goodbye, and it's kind of sad, sweet, sad. So then he also mentions that Sharks has made a lot of improvements for a week, and they talk about how humans, they live short lives, but they make quick adjustments and like grow very fast. So that's interesting. All right, so the second part focuses on Zane, and we learned that his best friend is called Gorilla Warrior, which is like a nickname he gave himself, and then Zane's nickname is Goatee Priest, which is like ridiculous. And we learned that they got those nicknames from like this statue of these two heroes that are like way ancient, like more ancient than Himmel and Frieren and that. And one of the heroes they don't know, but the other one is Graf, who's the priest they ran into, or not that, yeah, he's a priest, the priest monk guy, the elf who they ran into. And that when the boys were like hanging out with Hader back in the day, they kind of gave themselves these nicknames based on the statue and how they look a lot like the statue. Which, fortunately for Zane, this ridiculous name he gave himself, Gorilla Warrior, is very distinct, and people remember it. And he's also like a very showboaty guy, so he's actually spending a lot of time as they're going from town to town here in the north looking for his friend. Because if we recall, his friend left 10 years ago, and he is part of the reason he joined this group was to look for him. And so they continue on their journey. They go to like one town. They hear of stories about him, and they like, "Oh, he's that way." So they keep going that way. And they're still headed to like this big magic town in the north, so she can get like her magic certificate, so they can continue on up to like the demons. They can get past like the like real dangerous part of the north and get to like the Demon King's castle. So they get to they see another town, and then Zane mentions that, like, oh hey, the last village mentioned that he went to that village, so I want to check it out, or that they might be over here. So they go there, and the first person they talk to is like, oh yeah, Gorilla, I remember him. I don't really know where he went next though, but he was really close to that like stubborn old lady up on the hill. And like, oh, that's a rude thing to say. And then they go knock on her door, and she's like, hello, I'm the stubborn old lady. It's like, oh, that's her nickname for herself. So then they stick around because she gives them a bunch of like chores to do, so they can, like, before she answers any questions. And they end up sticking around for like it seems like at least a few days, just doing chores, like delivering things. And then Fern's like, oh, this is terrible. And Frieren's like, oh, actually, Himmel did this a lot. Like, we'd always be in like these towns doing like minuscule chores for them. It's kind of funny. Because it's, you know, it's like a JRPG where it's like you go to a town and someone's like, oh, my cat. And so you go get their cat, and then someone else is like, oh, I need like 6 blueberries. And you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go find these 6 blueberries or whatever. It's a lot of all the kind of like side quest bullshit. So that's fun. But eventually she's like, okay, I have one more thing for you to do. I want you to go clean this statue in the valley. So they head to the statue, and it's the same statue that Zane like saw when he was a kid. And this is actually where he has like the flashback to like when he was a kid and all this stuff. And he's like pretty pleased with himself about it. So anyway, the old lady mentions that when Guerrilla Warrior was here, he always mentioned Goatee Priest, who's, you know, clearly Zane, a whole bunch, and they always talk about it, how they'd adventure and be famous and do all this cool stuff. So that's all fun. And we find out that the Hater is the one who gave Zane the nickname Goatee Priest, because the priest in the one of the statue characters has a goatee, you know, and then Hater obviously recognizes Zane has a lot of like potential to be a priest, as he's got all that natural magical ability and capability that has been established thus far. And then the episode wraps up with they're getting ready to head out to the next town, and then Zane's kind of walking up after he talks to stubborn old lady, and he mentions that like, oh, she said that he headed towards this place, which is like to the east, and so where they're going is like more to the northwest, it seems, but like going to the east is where he went, and is where Guerrilla Warrior went. So then that's the dilemma that the episode leaves us out on. So in episode 15, we say goodbye to our priest, Goatee Priest. I guess this is like eventually going to happen, but I liked him as a character. I felt like he fit the like the 4 of them together worked well. So we'll see if someone else gets jumped on, but. In the first part of the episode, there starts to be a snowstorm, and they are having like trying to figure out what they're gonna do, and Zane's trying to decide if he wants to keep going with them or he wants to go look for a Guerrilla Warrior guy. So the village has like a cabin they can stay in, so they stay there, and then throughout the night a blizzard comes, and they end up being stuck there for about a month. So that gives Zane plenty of time to like hang out with everybody and for to kind of say his goodbyes before he takes off and goes the other direction. And we get some nice montages of people like doing stuff, helping out the village, just talking about random stuff. Frieren talks about how the most legendary and best spells of all are the ones that like remove oil stains and grease and stuff. So it's pretty funny. And then at some point, Frieren walks into Zane while he's considering stuff, and she's like, "Hey, can you go talk to the other humans because they're fighting and I don't know what to do?" And he's like, "Okay, yeah." So he goes, and so at the beginning of the or earlier on in the episode, Fern was outside gathering something, and her hand was like ice cold, and then she touched Stark with it on his face, and he like freaked out. And so I guess he did the same thing to her, and then she freaked out, and now they're fighting. And so Zane like has like a man-to-man talk with him about treating women right and about his feelings and being honest and all that stuff. And then he goes and talks to Fern, and she's like, "Well, I wasn't mad that he touched me. In fact, I kind of liked it. But when he grabbed my shoulder, who was so strong, it like threw me off. I got like really concerned all of a sudden." And he said the same thing to her, essentially, like, "Hey, you need to man up and tell me how you feel and be honest." And so then they both apologize, and that's cute. And then we see Zane drinking with Frieren, and he's like, "Why don't they just date, freaking dumbkins?" And then Frieren says some stuff to him, and he's like, "You're treating me like a kid." And Farron's like, "You are a kid," which is true. Like you equate it. So if she's 1,000 years old and he's, let's say in his 30s, then it's like he's like 3 years old and she's like 100, right? Like he's a child. That was fun. So anyway, so he decides to go off on his own and find his Guerrilla Warrior friend. And so they say goodbye. And then as he's walking off, he has like a little montage recollection in his brain of all the fun times they had. And he's like, "Man, sure is quiet when you're alone." And so that goodbye, Zane. I don't know, maybe we'll see him again. But it's like a nice little send-off. So moving on to the second part of the episode, Stark is gathering stuff to make soup, and he realizes that Fern's sick. So he wakes Frieren up, who's wants to sleep all day. and she does some magic on her to realize that she's got a cold. So they find an old woman, not an old woman, but like a middle-aged woman who's just living on her own in the north in this area, like got some cows and doing her own thing. And so she lets him stay with them. And Frieren looks up and finds like a recipe for medicine because Zane left him like a book with curatives and tinctures and potions and stuff. And she's like, oh yeah, we got to get some mushrooms from this like icicle cherry blossom, which is like this beautiful tree. And the old lady is like, oh, do you know where that's kind of hard to find? And Frieren's like, it's okay, I've been there before. And there used to be a village where this woman was, but that, I guess she was telling Frieren, because when Frieren was here before, she was like, oh, there was like a whole village, or like a big village. And I guess like several decades ago, it just kind of like, you know, they had like the factory shut down. And jeez. Oh man. Way too pleased with myself. And everyone moseyed on their way to the big city. So, but they get it. They have like some nice conversations about stuff, and there's a whole thing where Fern is upset because Farron's holding her hand because it makes her feel better, and then Stark's like, why are you holding her hand? And she's like, oh, ever since she was a little girl, she's loved it when people hold her hand. It makes her feel better. And then Fern gets like upset because she's 16 and I'm grown up now. So Frieren like apologizes for it later, but Fern's like, no, it's okay. just don't do it when Stark's around, essentially. And she's like, oh, got it, right, your boyfriend. And you know, it's some nice shots. This whole episode is a lot of like montages and kind of just quiet jibber jabber. So not much happens, but it's very cozy. Again, this whole series is super cozy. And then they head on their way, and I think they'll finally get to the City of Magic for her like test as they do like an exit crawl thing at the end, and they kind of mention that. So moving on. Episode 18 picks up with the crew finally getting to Orstein, the magic capital of the north. And we learn a little bit more about this whole like magic system / magic guild / whatever. So if you remember, Fern is a level 3 magic user, and it goes down. So level 1's the highest. So they're trying to get level 1. So they go to register the Frieren, and because you have to be at least a level 5 to register for a level 1 test, and because she has no guild ranking whatsoever, they're like, nope. So then Frieren's like, all right, Frieren, it's up to you. And she's like, no. And then Frieren like pulls out this like old amulet she's had forever, and then this old man who's like signing up, or he's like hanging out, he like looks back and he's like, wait, let me see that. And so they let her sign up for the rank 1 guild. And so her and Fern both sign up for this test. And we later find out that Fern is the youngest person to ever make 3rd level. Yeah. And then Frieren kind of remembers that even 100 years ago, when she was with her original party, Hemmel and those guys, that she pulled out they were talking about her signing up for guilds, or her like registering with a guild, and she's like, it's too much work to like have to sign up every like 100 years or so whenever they change the whole system around. And she's like, I got this is all I need, and no one knows what it is. So this thing she's carrying around and that she's shown before is like ancient, more so than just like the last round she went partying. Anyway, so they have 2 months before the test. They only give it every 3 years, and so they spend that 2 months like practicing and working on strategy and like learning more and like refining their skills, because both her and Fern are taking the test. Meanwhile, we run into another mage who's just kind of like hanging out outside, headed to Orstein, and some bandits walk up on her and she like taunts them, and then Griff comes along, who's the elf priest, and beats the shit out of them, and then tells them to get out of there if they want to live. And then he makes a comment about her eyes being wicked, being those of like an evil person, or a killer. That's what he says, of being a killer. And she like smirks, and then he says, well, on my way over here I found the graves of bandits, and so I was here. I didn't come here to help you. I came here to protect the innocent. Not even the innocent. I came here to save lives. That's what he says. And then he's like, I'm not going to interfere with anything you're doing. That's not my job. And so she mentions that she's going to Orstein to take the class 1 test. And he's like, oh, interesting. Maybe next time I run into, and he says to himself, next time I run into Frieren, I'm sure she'll have some fun stories for me to tell me. And you remember, Griff is the one who's the statue, the ancient statue that's even older than Frieren and her party. So I'm sure there's going to be more stuff going on with that. It's very interesting. Okay, so then we go to like the announcement ceremony, and we get some of the proctors who are just talking about like, oh, she's like a bad person. She killed like one of the proctors during the test, the murder lady. We got some guy who was like the excellent doing the second class test. And another guy who's like the head of the Northern Mages, who's the second class guy, is going for the first class. They mentioned Fern, and then they're like, so one of them's like, hey, who's that? And I'm like, I don't know. She has the magic aura of like an old lady, even though she's like clearly looks young. They hand out these bracelets, and the bracelets have like the team names, and there's 3 people per team, and there's 57 people. So Frieren ends up with these 2 girls who are literally fighting when they all meet up, and Fern ends up with the murderer and another person. So I'm sure she'll be fine. So we spend the rest of the episode mostly with Frieren as their. So the first task they have to accomplish is they have to capture this bird. I call it like a stela, something like that. And it's this cute little orange bird. We later find out it can travel like the speed of sound. And so it's very tricksy. And they're very rare. And while Frieren knows a lot about it, she's never actually seen one before this like expenditure. And then so we get a little montage of her and the girls. And the girls are... This is like second montage because it's a montage of her and Fern training. So this montage is just them like fighting and then looking around. I think they have to like nightfall or like the next... No, it's not nightfall because it's night at the end of this episode. They have like a day or 2 or something to like catch this thing. And all Frieren wants to do is find one and just observe it. And at some point, she's like, hey, watch the sky. And like, what's that supposed to mean? And she's like, it literally just watch the sky. So eventually, one of the girls, there's like redhead girl and blonde hair girl. I think one's Levine. I think one's Levine. I can't remember the other one's name. So Levine is the white hair girl. She finds a stela just hanging out in the water. And so they go look at it. And the girls like use their magic very coordinated, like extremely well coordinated, like as if they've been practicing and working together for a long time. And Frieren puts together that, they had a prior relationship. And after talking to him, she finds out that they went to magic school together at the same time and that they were like frenemies. And so they track down and like study the bird some more. And then that evening they're all kind of like chilling. And the redheaded girl goes out and she gets attacked by like this monster bird who's like gonna peck her brains out. And then Frieren like grabs it with like a light whip and moves it away. And then the girl talks about how, because she called out for Levin, and then Frieren kind of like asked her about that. And she says, yeah, I don't like her, but she would always push me and I'm a coward by nature. So, she got me to like fly and do all this other stuff. And we see an interaction with them when they're younger at the Mage Academy, and it's super adorbs. And then she's like, oh, hey, I think I have an idea for how to capture this stela. And then Frieren's like, tell me about it. And that's the end of that, episode 18. So we continue the great Mage Ascension battle, or the Hunger Games for mages. In episode 19 of Frieren no Sosu. Anyway, so Frieren and her new best friends forever, the redhead girl and the white-haired girl, they come up with a plan where they're going to... So the stelas sense magic, and they won't get close to it, and they're super fast, and they're somewhat immune to magic, kind of, sort of. Anyway, so what they're going to do is they're going to infuse all the water with mana so the stelas stay away, and then they're going to keep like one pond with no mana, and they're going to wait there, and Frieren's going to diminish her mana supply or her mana presence to like near 0 until the stela shows up, and then she's going to use the spell that she has, which can capture like any bird. It's like an old folk, like hundreds of years old kind of spell. And she used it against the monster in the previous episode to save the redheaded girl's life. But she has to be within, they say 50 centimeters, which is like 1.5 feet. So essentially almost touching it to use it. So she's just going to hang out and be like an elf princess so that the bird lands on her shoulder, and then she's going to capture it, which is what they do. Meanwhile, another group of mages, the one with the old man, I don't know if I mentioned these, the people talking about the mages like 2 episodes ago pointed out this guy who was like leader of the Northern Army, and they pointed out this other guy who was like the, highest level 2 mage, or something. I can't remember exactly what I said. You probably heard it like 10 minutes ago, so you'll remember. So his group, the older guy, the second class mage guy, not the Northern Army guy, his crew, he's very wise, and so they have some conversations about being wise and about mages showing stuff off, and how he disagrees with this whole like blood sport that the current mage administration is all about. Because the whole idea is that they're going to put a bunch of mages in here, give them like an impossible task, and they're going to like kill each other down, because those who can't live or who can't accomplish the task don't deserve to be first class mages or whatever. So it gets kind of bloody. So that murderer lady is actually not at a disadvantage or that evil compared to, like, I guess, mages in general, which we find out here. So he's like, all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of hang out and we're going to just kind of chill. And then when we sense the mage use mana near a body of water, I guess we're going to go over there and fight them. And so after Frieren gets the Stella, captures it, they show up and they begin the attack, which is he's with this brown-haired guy and this other redheaded girl. And the redheaded girl has like a staff, like not a mage staff. She's like younger and has like a bow staff almost, and like Chinese buns like on the top of her head, like Chun-Li. And she's super, super fast. And so battle commences. And that's into that part. So then, like a side story, we have Fern and her group. So Fern and the murderer lady and this other like nerd guy, they have caught their Stilla. And so they're kind of like, well, we should just hang out and hide and wait for this whole thing to end. And the murder lady's like, no, I want to kill people. And Fern's just like, do. But eventually they're like, oh, I'm thirsty. Let's go get some water. So they're being very cautious. And they come to realize, and the same thing that Frieren already knew, which is why their plan like works to draw the Stilla out, is that this dome they put around doesn't even let dust in. So all the riverbeds dried up. So there might be some ponds here and there. And then there's going to be like, there's a lake in the middle where they can get water. And the Stillas and other animals need to get water. So they're going to go to the water zap, which is where it's a good place. And that, that's where you want to find it. But if everything's got mana in it, and then Frieren's party even like froze the main lake and to like waste people's time trying to melt it and other stuff. Okay. So, but then they bump into the Northern Army guy and his crew, and that guy's like, I'm going to kill you all and take your Stilla. And I was like, oh, they're all murderers. Like, with Griff better, and he's like, oh, you're kind of a murderer. He said it very nonchalantly, but I thought that was just because he's an elf in humans, right? Am I right? Humans? But no, it's because it is kind of like humans. It's not just like, this bitch is crazy and she wants to murder people, which she does, and she is crazy. But it's like, oh, they're all like murderers. Okay. Fair enough. They're all terrible human beings. So then they kind of get into a fight. So there's like the Northern Army guy is fighting the murderer hobo, and then like the plain nerd guys are fighting each other. And then there's this like woman mage who uses rocks is fighting Fern, and Fern's just holding her off. And then the woman's like commenting to herself about how Fern's using like magic her grandfather would use. Like, it's all old. It's all very basic level magic. And she even comments about it, and Fern's like, all you need in combat against another mage is basic magic. Anything else is just showboating. And she's like, well, I'll show you about that. And he's like, if so-and-so got a hold of you, and I'm like, who's so-and-so? And it's like, oh, it's the Northern Army guy. He would show you. And then Fern's like, why? You're the strongest mage in that group. And then she's like, So I guess we'll find out more about that as well. Continuing the mage battle with the hunt for the Stilla, we have Fern very easily overpower the mage she's fighting, knocking her out. And then we get back to the murderer and the mercenary from the Northern War. They have some chit-chat back and forth. She uses this like cutting magic that like cuts through anything, and he's kind of blocking it. He's getting cut a little bit, nothing too crazy. And then he casts like a binding spell on her, which binds her. And I guess his binding spell will stop anyone from moving and accessing any magic powers as long as he can keep like total focus on them. And so they chit-chat about him murdering people or having to kill women and children, and she's like something, and he's like something, and we get some more background on him. And that's where we learn that this Northern Mage Forces or whatever battalion is a mercenary troop, and that usually they just fight demons, but occasionally they'll go out and they'll fight other human armies, I guess. And that at some point he did fight like an army of children, and that seems to have gone soured him on killing quite a bit. Anyway, so she tosses the Stilla cage up in the air, which distracts him, and then she goes to cut his eyes out, but misses, and then he binds her again, and then he's about to kill her, but then Fern shows up and is like, boo, because he's like, wow, I didn't set your mana at all. That's very impressive. And he's like, wait, where's like whatever her name is? And she's like, I killed her. So, and he's like, well, I guess I'm done. Like, we have to have the entire 3-man team and the Stilla to like win and move on to the next stage of the competition. So I guess that's out for me. And so he starts walking off and unbinds the murderer, and then she's about to do something, and Fern's like, stop it. And she's like, okay, fine, I won't kill him. So then she's like, what about the other guy? And then the murderer is like, oh, he's a lot more tricky than you think he is, old glasses boy. And so he's fighting the guy. So the third member of the Northern Mercenaries little team, he uses like flower magic or something. So he's sending like shards of metal created from flower petals or something and he's cutting up the nerd, the glasses guy, pretty good. And the glasses guy's like, oh, we haven't even started our fight yet. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? I cut you up good. I'm going to kill you here. And the guy's like, oh, no, I'm just watching you. I'm just trying to figure out what your weakness is, and then I'm going to strike. And he's like, rah, 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 rah. And then he sees the nerd guy like start to fade away, and then he gets grabbed in the neck and shocked into unconsciousness, or just to take him out. And it's a nerd guy. And he's like, I created a clone so I could watch you, and then I stunned you. So get fucked. And then he meanders off to meet up with Fern and the murderer lady, apparently. So then we go back to the Northern Mercenary guy, and he finds the other mage lady that Fern was fighting. And he's like, oh, you're not dead after all. Well, get up, let's go. And she's like, I can't, you have to carry me. And so he casts magic spell to lift her up, and she's like, no, carry me on your back. And he's like, ugh, fine. So he does, and they start chit-chatting about how kind he is and how he's helping out and all that good stuff. And then they find the flower guy, and he also can't move, so he uses magic to carry him. And then she essentially says, like, hey, thank you for saving my village when I was younger. Or, part of the your mercenaries seem really scary, but in reality, you spend all this time fighting demons because you want to help people and because you're a good guy deep inside. And then he makes some comment about, like, well, I didn't do it to save the village. I made a promise to a girl when I was like 5 years old that I'd always be there to protect her and save her. And we see an image of her when she's a little kid and him as like a little kid making the promise, and it's like, oh, precious. That's his like old girlfriend from like way back in the day. And then they're like making plans about like visiting her grandparents or something, and you're like, oh, adorable. And then she's like, wait, stop. And she points up into a tree, and there's a Stilla. And remember, he has like binding magic that he can use as long as he can see it. So then he binds the Stilla, and they grab it, and he's like, fucking luck. So then we go to the proctor of this test, and he's chit-chatting. He's talking to like nobody, and then all of a sudden there's like another mage there, and she's the proctor of the second part, and she talks about how it's a waste to have these mages like kill each other, and how it's silly. And he's like, whatever, if they die, they're not worth our time, and something. And so you're gonna, they got this barrier that's protecting them from the rain, and they chit-chat about that a little bit and like the whole process. Then we switch back to Frieren. And Frieren recognizes that the old man is like watching from the woods, and then the speedy lady like goes real fast and grabs a Stilla and bounces out, and then they're all just standing there in front of him. So then we have Frieren's team and then the old man's team just kind of like staring at each other. And she's like, I don't understand why you guys didn't just like piece the fuck out. And he's like, because it would leave a mana trace and you would be able to follow it. And she's like, okie dokie. And then the guy in the old man's team is like, all he wants to do is like murder the children that are in Frieren's team. And the old man keeps being like, we're not going to murder these like children, just put them to sleep, and then they won't be able to follow us, and we'll be fine. And he's like, oh, but I want to murder them. And he's like, stop it. He's like, well, you never murdered anybody? And then both the old man and Frieren are like, you need to shut the fuck up and stop trying to murder children, you asshole. And then the guy tells us about like the privilege of being a first class mage. So I guess like after all the demon wars and all that stuff, there was it looks like an elf lady, an elf or like a demon or not, some non-human. I guess she set up this magic system, and whoever achieves like first rank status gets like a privilege, as in they can ask her for like any spell they want because she's like a living grimoire. And so once they get that spell, then they they get like unlimited wealth or power or whatever. And so people become monsters, quote unquote, to become first class mages, so that they can get access to like this privilege and this spell. So I guess that's the motivation. So then he lifts the girls up onto like a plateau using his magic, and then the old man and Frieren are just standing there, and then Frieren like points her staff at him, and dun dun dun, that's the cliffhanger for episode 20. So the battle commences. The battle continues. So Dude Meister takes the ice and water lady up on the plateau and goes up and starts fighting them with earth magic, essentially. And then they keep defending. Like the water lady magic can't do anything unless she has access to water. So the ice lady keeps firing at him, and he keeps defending. And then the water lady's using her defensive magic against the rock. And then eventually he has like a little conversation with them about how the magecraft has changed over the years. Instead of being like force or magical force or whatever, that it's become the use of physical things, because the barriers are tuned for kind of like a generic attack, and so they can be used against like a sword strike or a wolf or like some magic, or particularly magic. But then when it comes to like overwhelming force, like a boulder falling or like a super powerful physical attack, the barriers can't block against it. So he's just going to keep pounding them with like stalagmites that he summons out of the ground, and it's going to bust through their magical barrier and take care of them. And so he does that, and then they get knocked out pretty good. And then they get back up, and he's like, well, if you insist, I will kill you. Going back a little bit, at the beginning of the episode, Oh, so if you remember from the previous episode, we learn about this like elf lady, or I think she's an elf, some sort of long-eared creature. I say I don't know for sure because she looks like an elf, but then we see like a flashback where Frieren meets her with her master. And we find out that this elf lady with the grimoire lady is like her master's master, and she refers to Frieren as like an elf. So it's not like, oh, it's an elf like me. She says like, oh, you brought an elf, like that. And so I don't know if it's just like the localization or the translation or whatnot, but it makes me question whether this is like an elf, particularly because in Japanese stuff, like Japanese anime, a lot of times demons will just have long ears as well, and they all look like humanish. So sometimes it's hard to tell if like, is she supposed to be like a demon, or is she? And I don't think she's a demon, because when Flavor introduces Frieren, she says, "This is my student. She's great. She's going to destroy the Demon King." And then the other lady's like, "All right, well, I'll give you whatever spell you want. You choose." And Frieren's like, "No, I don't want that. The joy of magic is like discovering spells on your own." And she's like, "I don't like her." And then Flavorin's like, God, I forgot her name. The Flavorin is like, no, she's perfect for destroying the Demon King, because she's someone who's born for peace, and she'll make it happen and exist. And so we get some of that back and forth with her while she's fighting the old man mage, and that battle doesn't go very long because Frieren just pretty much destroys him. He uses his most powerful attack with like all his mana, and it does nothing to her. Also, we flip back over to the proctors who are sitting around, and then the girl proctor who's supposed to be proctoring the second event is like, "Hey, did you realize someone's like examining your barrier like all of yesterday and last night?" And he's like, "Whatever, no one can beat it. It's an ancient magic, blah 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 blah." So of course Frieren destroys it. And if you remember, it was raining, so because it's raining, the water magic lady has tons of access to water, and she's virtually she's pretty super strong if she has access to all that water. So she's able to defeat the stone guy, while the ice magic lady holds him to the ground. And so then they get their Stilla back. And then so after Frieren defeats the old man, she's like, "Hey, you better come out and give me my bird back, or I'm going to kill him." And the old man's like, "She's not going to kill me. Don't worry about it." And then the young fast lady is like, I'm gonna run over there real quick and get her. And get him, rescue him, and then we'll go. And so she tries that, but Frieren was expecting her to be there and detect her mana and all this stuff. So the fun thing about this whole episode, besides just like the battles are cool and whatnot, is we get some back and forth with Frieren and the old man. And the old man's like an old school mage, just like Frieren's like a super old school mage. And so they both agree on a lot of things. They agree that like the old man doesn't really want to get a spell from the grimoire lady. He enjoys the pursuit of magic. His big thing is he wants to be a first class mage so that he can go back home, because there's a grave he wants to visit, but he can't. It's like way up in the north, so he can't get to the village to see the grave without being a first class mage. So that's the only reason he wants to do it, because he's super rich, he's super powerful. You know, he's like a mage elite. He just needs like this first class thing to like visit his home, essentially. So he's a very sympathetic like rivalry character, which I like. It's very shonen-y in that regard. So Frieren and the girls get there. They're still back. We see Fern and her crew, and they're just hanging out, chit-chatting about nothing. And we learn that this team's only going to last through the first event, and then they're going to be posed against each other once again in future events. So because they're kind of chit-chatting, and then the guy with the nerd with them is like, "You probably shouldn't be talking too much." So with the old man, he's not out though, because him and his crew, even though they're like all out of mana, they are able to track down a couple of guys who have a Stilla, but their third party member died, so they can't win because the whole party has to be alive. And so he just runs up to him and he's like, "I'm gonna fight you like man," and he punches at him, and so they get a Stilla from just like fighting, because they're all out of mana. So that's pretty funny. So then the event ends, and there's 18 survivors, which is 6 teams of 3. Yeah. So 6 teams were able to get Stillas and remain wholly intact, so 18 people moving on forward. And I think, is that it? And then we get like a last shot of Stark. He's just hanging out in a tavern, and he's like, "You know what? It's been pretty good since they've been gone for the last couple of days. I don't have like mom, Frieren, tell me I gotta go to bed early or do whatever, so I can stay as late as I want and do whatever I want." And then the bartender's like, "You sound like you've had a really rough go lately," and he's like, "You bet." Episode 22 takes us back to the slice of life that this anime has been almost exclusively. Outside of killing demons and outside of this like magic competition, it's been super cozy, and we're back to it. But it was kind of jarring because the last 3 episodes were very shonen anime. You know, the mage battles with their special moves and like, "Oh, we got you. Nope, I got you. Oh, time for my extra power. I got it." It's not that bad. So I kind of forgot how cozy this thing is. So that was nice. We start off with Fern waking Stark up. He was sleeping in, and she's pissed. And Fern also slept in. And they have to go out and do stuff. And then Fern and Stark are trying to figure out how to like appease Fern because she's all upset and stuff. And she's like, I know. There was a place I ate at 80 years ago or 100 years ago that was the best food in the whole city. Let's go there and eat. That'll be great. And so they go. So then we switch over to the stone guy, the guy who used stone magic against Fern's party, and he's helping his grandma like fix something, and then she gives him some candies as a reward, and he's like, Grandma, I'm not a kid anymore, and she's like, whatever, and walks off. He then gets approached by old man and the redheaded girl who's eating like a pastry of some sort, and he's like, come, we're gonna go eat dinner together, and he's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And the old man's like, hey, how about you stop being such a dick and hang out with your friends? Oh, we're not friends, we're blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, shut up, come on. And the old man uses like his trickery. He's like, oh, my wife and I, there's our favorite place to eat, but I can't exactly remember where it's at. If only someone could show me from the area. And he's like, oh, fine, I'll take you. So they go. Then we bump into Nerd, and Nerd is approached. He's like watching some cats. Don't know what that's all about. But then he gets approached by Murder Lady, and she's like, hey, what's up, buddy? And he's like, what do you want? And she's like, I just want to hang out. And so they start walking, and then they're talking about her being a murderer and this, and why didn't she kill what's his name? And then she binds him with the power that the northern guy used. And he's like, oh, I see. So you steal magic. And I hate it because I learned magic because he's a wizard and she's a sorcerer from Dungeons & Dragons, essentially. She just like feels magic and he studies magic. And she's like, I want to get to know you so that I can steal your magic. And he's like, not going to happen. And he's like, well, you might as well just go kill me or whatever. But if you do kill me, you're not going to get the magic I have. And she's like, fine. And so he starts walking, and she's walking along, and he's like, what are you doing? So then they all merge at this restaurant, and Frieren orders Fern like all the desserts she wants, and they have delicious meals, and the old man with his team show up, and the murderer and the nerd guy show up, and they're all eating meals and having a good time, and the old man makes some comment about like, hey, it's a mealtime, it's time to celebrate, we can all relax and just enjoy ourselves. So, the guy's so wise. I like him. Anyway, so Frieren recalls when she was here with Himmel and the rest of the party like all those decades ago, and how what they did is they got like this magic cutting knife for like the master chef who claims to be the greatest chef in the whole world, and he was like, here's a free meal. And then they talk about how the best gift they can give, or Frieren's like, I'll come back someday, but it won't be the same. And he's like, no, I promise it'll be the same. And she's like, and then Himmel's like, well, make sure your posterity keeps the recipe exactly the same. That's the best gift you can give to us. They don't. And Frieren comments like, well, that guy lied. It's not the same. And then she's like, but it's better. Aw. This show. So then the next morning, Stark's out doing something, and Frieren comes and gets him. So then he heads over and he sees that Fern is giving Frieren the silent treatment. And she's giving Frieren the silent treatment because Frieren slept in again and didn't go shopping. And Fern's mad. And what happens is Fern doesn't get mad after once or twice or three times. She lets all that rage build up inside her so that she can let it all out at one time by giving the silent treatment to Frieren. And the only way to satisfy her is to get her snacks, which is what she requests. So then they all go to find snacks, and then we switch over to Redhead and Water and Ice Girl. And Water Girl's hanging out, and then Ice Girl shows up, and she's wearing like a very, very, very pretty dress, and she looks very proper. And then the redheaded, or the Water Girl, who's redheaded as well, but the other girl's redheaded as well. So the Water Girl is like, oh, you look so beautiful. And she's like, oh, my brothers all went to like the Capitol, and they brought back all these gifts, and then my mom dresses me up like a doll. I hates it. You can have it. And she's like, I will be your prince. And then the Ice Girl like suplexes her. It's like, shut up. And so then they're walking, and they bump into, then we go back to Frieren and crew, and they're in a bakery looking at stuff. And Stark's like, so Fern, what do you want? And she's like, I don't care, it doesn't matter. And he's like, oh, damn, that means she cares a lot. Meanwhile, the northern guy with another guy other guy in his party, I guess he's a mercenary too, they're wandering around like accousting men, like touching them and like looking at them and making commentary and wandering around. They're clearly looking for a warrior of some kind for some reason. Back to Frieren. Ice Girl and Water Girl walk into the bakery while they're there, and they're like, oh, hey, Z's. So then they all start traveling together and chit-chatting, and at that point, Northern Mercenary and his homie show up, and they grab Stark, and they're like, "Oh, this is exactly what we need. This is a great warrior." As I start dragging him off, he's like, "Wait, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Hey, we got hired while we were here to like take care of some stuff over there. We need your help. We need a frontline warrior." And he's like, "But," and then Friern's like, "Take him." And he's like, "No." Then Frieren and then Frieren and Fern and the ice and water girl, they all head back to Frieren's hotel room or in room or whatever, and they're eating like these snacks that the girls got them, and Fern's like, "Ooh, these are very delicious snacks. This is exactly what I wanted." And they're like, "Thanks," and they're just like chit-chatting and being girls, and Fern's just smiling and being happy. And then they get like a tap 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 from a blue bird who has a thing, and it's the announcement of the second challenge for the Mage First Class program or whatever. And then the girls are like, "Ruh-roh, we're screwed." And Fern's like, "Why?" And she's like, "The proctor. She's proctored 4 challenges over the last like 10 years or something, and no one's passed them ever. Not a single person." It's like, ruh-roh. And then we get like a montage of all the different people, like Old Man and Stone Man and Redhead Girl and some other people we barely saw, all getting their invitings. And then we see Stark and the mercenaries. They killed like a giant beast and they're eating it. And they're like, "Yeah, this is so delicious." Yep. There you go. Episode 23 here starts the second trial, and we get introduced to it by the kind of odd proctor lady. She pretty much she takes them to a labyrinth. This is a labyrinth that no one's ever gotten to the bottom of ever, apparently. And the thing is, they can team up or not team up or work together or not work together, but the goal is they will all get to the bottom. And whoever gets to the bottom before dawn the next day gets to move on to like the third and final test. I think that's the final test. Anyway, so then we get the Old Man and some other people talking about how they should team up, and certain groups like the mercenary guy with like his 2 companions from the previous test, they go in together. The 2 girls, the ice and water, go in together. Some people just go in by themselves. And then Frieren and Fern go together, but then the proctor lady is like, "I'm going to come with you." Oh, well, they also have these bottles with golems in them. So when they break the bottles, the golems like break them out and run away and get them out, and they lose. So we see that happen at one point, and it's very impressive. So I'm trying to remember the other group. So that group. The murderer lady there with the nerd. It doesn't necessarily. I don't remember seeing them specifically go in together, but they probably do. And then so the 3 groups we follow the noble, or we follow the mercenary group, we follow the Old Man group, which is 5 people, and they go in last, and then we follow Fern and Frieren with the proctor, and they're of course their adventures are more fun and lighthearted and silly. So we'll start with that. So Frieren and Fern go in there, and they avoid like all traps, and they just kind of cruise through everything. They destroy things before they even get attacked. They find a bunch of treasure. They find a bunch of goon stuff. We learn that Himmel loves exploring dungeons, and that even when they got to like the end of the dungeon or like the next floor, he would want to continue exploring the whole floor. So it's very like RPG based, and that he tricked essentially Frieren into wanting to do it as well by saying there could be hidden or secret grimoires laying around. So she continues to do that, and then so they gather like all the garbage treasures from like the floor, and then Frieren gets trapped in mimics a couple times, and we learn that with mimics, if you pull people out, they'll kill them, but you have to push them more in so that they hit like the back throat of the mimic, and they like mimic like coughs them up. Also, she sometimes just blows them up, that it like hurts her, it like messes up, it like frizzes her hair, which she doesn't like, and so that's all very humorous. And then the proctor lady is just like, "What is happening?" And finally, they get to like almost the bottom floor, and they take like a little break, and Frieren is like going through all the cheap crap, the tchotchkes essentially that they found. And then the lady's like, "I don't understand." And then Fern's like, "Yeah, she always does this. It's kind of crazy." And she's like, "No, I understand you. You have like no passion for what you're doing, but you're extremely powerful." And then Fern's like, "Oh, ever since I was a little girl, I promised somebody that I would be a powerful mage, and so I feel like I spent all my determination doing that. And so now I'm kind of like, whatever. I have like no passion left." And then the woman's like, "So why do you keep adventuring?" And then she tells a story, like essentially what's happening here. The first time she went to a dungeon with Frieren, and Frieren was like, "Ooh, look at this! Ooh, look at this!" It made Fern smile, and she likes it. So, and she just likes hanging out with Frieren, essentially, and going on like adventures with her. It's like fun times. So it's not the magic, even though she's very skilled and powerful and good at all this stuff. It's like hanging out with her friends, because say it with me, folks. Friendship is magic. That's right. Friendship is magic. That's why we do everything. I love anime. So, and so that's the end of that story in this episode. So then if we focus on the Old Man and his crew, so they're going along. They trip the trap that releases gargoyles. They have to fight them all off. One of the girls gets knocked into this room She's like a no-name girl. She's like a red shirt from Star Trek. So then the walls have spikes and they start closing in on her. They beat the gargoyles. They try to rescue her, but they're not able to get through like the magic barrier that's like the trap. And so they're like, use the golem, use the golem. And so she smashes it, and this giant golem like pops up and like breaks the walls and kicks through the door and picks her up and goes da, 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 and runs out of the thing. And so then the old man's like, huh, that is very powerful. So that's pretty funny. And then they get to like a deeper part of the dungeon where they run into like a. You ever play like a Link, the second Link, the Adventure of Link, or like Zelda Adventure of Link, where at the very end you fight like Shadow Link? And there's a lot of stuff that has this kind of like theme. I don't know if that's the first time that it was ever used in like video games or anime, but that's the first time I encountered it. So that's first time. That's what I'm going to go with. So they run into like Shadow Link versions of themselves. But so the old man crew, they only run into a Shadow Link version of the redheaded like fast girl, and with the four of them combined, because there's the rock guy, the old man, the red hair, and now there's like some quiet blonde woman, who's more like magic-y, just like straight like force magic, I guess you could say, if you're going from like a Dungeons & Dragons kind of perspective. And they all their powers combined, they kill this thing, and then they talk about how there's probably more, and that it's interesting that these things are showing up, and this is probably why people have had issues here before, and it's a good thing they teamed up, because if it was just one-on-one, they might not be able to beat it. And then they enter the next room, and the old man's like, oh, fuck. If I knew this was going to be part of the trial, I would have used the golem a long time ago. And what we see is, shit, it's Shadow Link version of Frieren. And she's starting to float down from the sky, and someone's like, can we beat her? Oh, poor guys. Hopefully they can. And then the last group, the Northern Mercenary, we spend the least amount of time with. We see them kind of like doing... We don't see them really doing much. They enter, and then they also fight shadow versions, but they're fighting shadow versions of all three of them, not just one of them. Because what happens is they're walking along, and then the girlfriend is like, I got captured by your spell. And he's like, put up a barrier. If they can't see you, the spell doesn't work. And so then the flower guy creates like a flower barrier, and then she gets released, and then they start getting like shot with like attacks. And he looks around, and he sees the three of them, the three Shadow Link versions of themselves. So we don't see a resolution of the battle. That's where that goes. So continuing in with the next episode with this good stuff. So continuing on, Frieren and crew are getting deeper and deeper, and they bump into an area where Frieren is like, wait a second, I sense magic behind this wall. And Frieren pulls up the map they've been making, the magic map, like Etrian Odyssey, and is like, there's nothing behind there that I can see here. And Frieren's like, no, trust me. And she starts like touching everything and trying to reach underneath. She's like, can't you see? There's definitely something behind this. And eventually she finds like a little knob, and she twists it, and it opens up this stairway. So they head up in there, and they find this exquisite mural of like the king who's buried in like this king's tomb. And they're all like very impressed with it. And Frieren's like, wow, that's so beautiful, and blah, blah, blah. And Frieren's like very pleased that Frierin's catching the dungeon bug. If you will. They then continue onward and eventually bump into Old Man and his crew, and they're like, hey, what's up? What are you guys just standing here for? And he's like, oh, we have a problem. And so Frieren looks, and she's like, oh, that makes sense. It's me. And so then they start having a discussion about what to do here, and they're like, could you defeat her yourself? And Frieren's like, I don't know. Maybe I could. I'm not exactly so sure about that. So, they kind of strategize, and someone's like, well, maybe we could hypnotize them. And she's like, well, I'm like immune to hypnotism and stuff, so I don't know what that's all about. And then I guess the blonde lady that they're with is beautiful, and so she's like an expert when it comes to like, not an expert, but she's much better than anyone else there, like hypnotism and like mind manipulation. And so she tries a couple spells on Frieren, and nothing happens. And she's like, yeah, you're pretty immune. So I don't know if it's anything that's worked. If anyone could do it, it would be this other girl, like Adele, who's in the maze with another group, because her family like is a masters of hypnosis and other like mind type magic. And then we go see Adele, and this is not somebody we've been involved with. She's with like a mustached guy and a bald guy, and they're like trapped. And there's one of these like clones. I don't know if clone of who though, because it's like someone with a lot of hair and a lot of like hair powers. And I'm like trying to get an eyeball on it, and it's like, this doesn't look like anybody else in here. So maybe it's someone who was copied before that was killed. I don't know. It's very strange. So they have like a conversation about what to do there, and they decide like, okay, if we're gonna do this, we gotta try. You gotta distract it for like 15 seconds, and then I can like give it an order and see what happens. Sorry, my car's making like weird noises. It feels like the gears aren't going into place. Yeah, that's weird. Anyway, so we sorry about that. So then they try to do that, and then it doesn't work because these creatures clearly have no mind, which is something Frieren said before. So they can't use like mind magic on it. And she gets hit, and so she has to golem out of there, and the other two like run off to find like a more powerful person to like help them fight. Then we switch back to Frieren and them, and Fearen's like, well, we can't just assume it has a mind because they're clones. So they probably don't. So we need to just like not worry about that. So what else can we do? It's like we got to do brute force, and like, oh, can anyone have enough power? Can you do enough power to like get by this thing? And Fearen's like, I don't know, maybe something. And then Fearen's like, well, it's got to be me. And they're like, And Fearen's like, I can kill Master Frieren. And then Fearen's like, excellent. So that was pretty funny. The one other side, we have a couple other side tangents. We see the ice and water girl doing well and getting through the dungeon. We have a little moment with the murderer and the nerd where the murderer is, and the nerd got like hit by her clone, and he's like, oh, and the clone took his like golem thing, and the murderer is talking to him and being like, how do I know you're not the clone? And he's like, I guess we'll never know. And she's like, I'm gonna go to back for you. And she's like, well, you're about to die, so let me give you this. And he's like, no, keep it in case you need it. And she's like, I'm gonna go fight it. And he's like, no. And then she goes to fight herself, and she's doing decent. But then the clone uses the binding spell that she stole from the mercenary guy on her, and she's like, looks like your luck's out, because the nerd guy, what's the clone? So the nerd guy's standing there, and he goes, boom, and kills it. And then it's like, oh, you saved me. I knew you would. I'm learning more about you every day. And he's like, whatever. Aw, they're such a cute couple. She's probably gonna betray him and kill him, but say Livy. And then we see them moving around, and then who's the last? Oh, and then the last thing is the Northern Mercenary and his crew. They're battling their guys, and they have like a little flower cocoon that the flower guy's using. And then he like does some. He's like fighting, and he's like, "We're gonna run out of mana if we keep trying to do this. I gotta finish this." And he like it looks it's very dark, but it looks like he blew chunks off the wall or the ceiling, and they crash down on their clones and kill them. So he's like, "Nothing's gonna stop me. I can destroy anything." Yeah. So now we plan. I don't plan. Frieren and Fern and the rest of the crew plan, and we get the arrival. So there was Adele from the previous episode that was the hypnotist, and her and her crew found out that these things don't have minds to control, and so one of them like shows up, and he's like, "Hey," and they're like, "Oh, where's Adele and the other guy?" And it's like, "Well, Adele got hit, and then she pieced out, and the other guy jumped in the way of the monster, and hopefully he got out. But I'm here to let you guys I'm here to join you guys and give you some information." So the information he gives is that the monsters don't have minds, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we kind of figured that out already." So, but thank you anyway. You can definitely join us. And then the tall, pretty lady, she heals him, and I say pretty because Frieren legitimately in the previous episode was like, smells so pretty. So they start kind of planning what to do, and again, Fern reiterates the end of the last episode that like I can do it, and then they're like, how can you beat her? And then she has Frieren go stand against a wall, and then she uses a spell, and then everyone's like, holy cow, what the heck? And then the old man's like, oh my gosh, she does have a weakness, and everyone else is like, I feel like I'm missing something. And then they explain that Frieren does this thing where she like pauses for a moment, or she like drops her mana for an instant when she's being attacked by like simple spells or something. And there's a whole conversation later about like, so the spell they got that they used to kill the demon like at the beginning of the first season. I think this is the second season. I don't know. This might still all be the first season, but in the beginning, that Fern and her used against the monster, and they talked about they built all this stuff up or anything. Fern's had that access to that her whole life, so she can cast it on like instinct. While Frieren, because she was around so much longer than that spell existed, it takes her a moment when it's cast to like register what's going on and to build a defense, because it's not like, and that instant is all that's needed to like finally destroy her. And they're like, all right, cool. And also, so at this point as well, the ice and water mages show up, and the ice mage is talking about her brothers, and one of her brothers was on like an advanced party that came down here, or like she said advanced party, which makes me think they were just like scouting the area out. But then she talks about how like a lot of people died except like her party, and so there was a lot of clones and all this stuff. So she kind of knew what was going on, and that. And then the old man's like, well, that would have been really nice information to have if you would have just told everybody in the first place instead of being like an asshole. And then her and the stone guy kind of like flirty banter back and forth, her calling him like an old man and stuff. Anyway, so they got that information, and the information about that behind the door, behind the Shadow Link Frieren is the monster that is like creating all these things, and as soon as they destroy it, all the other shadows, the shadow links, will disappear. But also that this thing is creating them, and I guess it's not creating all of them at once. It's not like as they enter, they kind of get created, and they're also. So it's not like that's why there's not like one for every single person. It just is kind of almost randomly maybe, or it's choosing certain ones. So it just so happens that the mercenaries party, all three of them got cloned. But for a lot of people, it's not. That's not necessarily the case. And we don't get any story with them or with the murderer and the nerd. But then we just get a lot of planning about what they're going to do and drawing out. And as the monster behind the door is getting threatened, it's going to summon all the clones down to like fight. So Fern and Frieren are going to go fight Shadowlink Frieren, and then everyone else is going to like guard against anything that's coming down their way. What else is there that's important to know? Oh, and the reason they can't just like blast, through the door and kill the thing, or the walls, is because Frieren, it's like if these things think like Frieren would have like guarded the whole thing, and she can even sense like there's like a protection over the door, and so she assumes it's just protecting the whole thing. So the only way to destroy the protection, because it's like a folk magic spell, remember there's like the wizard spells and the folk magic is stuff she's just found over like the years, is the gate or the lock that's kind of like sealing the door is tied to her life force, or like the Shadowlink life force. So the Shadowlink has to die to open that thing, and they can blast the thing and kill everything, and they can all get to the bottom floor and all become. Well, I think there's one more trial after this. It seemed. Maybe this is the last trial, but it seemed that there was at least one more trial after this. So that's the plan. And so they open the door, and Frieren and Fern head in there. And they shut the door, and then they get ready to like the rest of the crew gets ready to like battle whoever comes down. So the plan here is that Frieren, Shadowlink Frieren's going to attack Fern, and then Fern's going to like hide, and then real Frieren is going to like attack Shadowlink Frieren, so to distract her and keep her busy, so she doesn't attack Fern, because she's got like to focus all her attention on that, and that Frieren makes a comment like, "Only I know how truly terrifying I am." It's pretty good. And she's smirking a lot. Like, while they're making the plans and doing all this stuff, she's like smirking, and Fern's like, "What's your deal?" And then Frieren has like a memory of like planning dungeon attacks and like the Leroy Jenkins moments from World of Warcraft, like sitting around discussing how you're going to fight the boss. And it's like, "Oh, you do this and you do this and you do this and I got this." And she's like, "I love it. It's like reminds me of the time when I was with my other friends doing this stuff. It like makes me really happy." And then we get in there, and we get to a point, and it's Frieren's about to use a super powerful attack to distract it, and then Fern like steps out to cast like the Zodiac magic, or the Zark, whatever it's called. And then Frieren has a flashback. So in the flashback, she's wandering up to the other elf lady. I think it is an elf, who's like the grimoire person, and this is after Frieren is dead, her master. And she gives her the will. And then in the will, it says, "Hey, I established an empire, and I built like a magical tradition, and I want you to lead like the Mage Academy or the Mage Liberation Front or whatever to teach everyone." And like then the elf lady gets like, she's like, "Man, it's stupid, Frieren." Like tears the whole thing up. She's like, "Last thing I want is for all the humans to have magic and stuff. That's stupid. I don't like it one bit." And then Frieren's like, "Yeah, she told me this would happen, but here it is. All right, adios." And then the grandma lady, like, she hops off and she's like, "Come, let's go for a walk." And then she talks about how Frieren was, on a whim, she took her as like a magical disciple and taught her magic, and that she loved magic and she loved stupid spells like the flower spell and all this stuff. And it was, they both talk about how like humans have such fleeting lives, and Frieren was like so compassionate about everything. And then the other elf lady just kind of talks about how it's interesting because they if the elves, if they have like a quandary or a quagmire about something, they can take like a whole century to just kind of like work it out and figure it out and come up with the best plan of action. Well, humans, they got to like rush into things and just kind of take a guess and go for it, and it's like very interesting how they all work. And then they talk about how like the humans are gonna eventually take over from like the elves, like the age of elves is kind of like going on its way, and that these demons and the Demon King and all that are around, but then the humans are going to eventually destroy them, and then it's going to be the age of humans. And Frieren's like, "Oh yeah," and then the grimoire lady's like, "Yeah, it'll be within 1,000 years, and I'm sure you'll be involved taking out the Demon King, so make sure you keep training. You don't want to be killed by the Demon King or by a human mage. And then we go back to Frieren right after she casts her like super spell, and then Fern steps out and blasts and destroys her like Shadow Link self, and then Frieren has like a smirk on her face because. And part of the flashback, she's like, "I'm actually really excited to see what happens in the future. Like, I like the change. I think it's interesting, and it'll be like a new age of magic when who knows what's going to happen and what new spells and what new stuff." And then the other lady's like, "Oh." So, episode 26 is really exciting because mostly it's battles. So we have all the Shadow Link versions of everybody, and then we have all the remaining people. And I thought, I guess I missaw, or they like went back or something. I don't know. Anyway, so Fern did not kill Shadow Link Frieren. In fact, I don't think she might not even have attacked her. I don't know. It was kind of confusing. But this entire episode dashes between the different individuals fighting Shadow Link versions or getting defeated by them or planning. And but the big thing is Frieren and Fern versus Shadow Link Frieren, which is excellent. So we'll get to that last. So first we just get like a recap. We see Frieren and we start with the Grimoire elf talking about how the only thing that could kill Frieren is the Demon King or a human mage, which goes back to the Fern issue, right? So it's like why they plan on Fern killing her, and Fern's like super powerful and whatnot, and besties forever, and knows all Frieren's tricks. Spoiler alert, she does not. Meanwhile, everyone else is... The old man says, hey, we should go and try to ambush the Shadow Links as they're coming down, because if they attack us all at the same time, we're screwed, because there's more of them than us, because there's people that were here that got Shadow Linked, and then they're gone now. And then they determine that the biggest threats are going to be Fern, who can like almost completely hide her mana and is one of the strongest fighters there. And then Verbal, I think, is the proctor. And she's the hair lady from before. When I was like, I'm confused who this is, that's her. So her magic is tied closely to her hair. And she has a super weakness. So that weakness is Ubel, or Udal, I think it's Ubel, who's the murderer lady, because she cuts things. And so and so Verbal, the proctor's magic is highly tied in with like her hair. And there's a whole story where Verbal's like thinking about we see the old man. I'm trying to remember. The hair lady fights and defeats Stone Guy and Ice Lady. Oh my gosh, my car's having like gear shifting problems. All right, back to fourth gear. Anyway, sorry. So the and they gall him out of there before they get killed. And then old man shows up to help them, but he's too late, and he's like, shoot. The nerd and murderer lady show up, and they're looking, and she's like, oh, I got this. This is no problem whatsoever. And she steps out to fight him, and she's like, hair, so easy to cut. And then we get a flashback to when Verbal was proctoring the second class mage thing, and Murderer Lady was there trying to do it. And there was this guy, one of the tests was there's this guy with this cloak that is like indestructible, completely indestructible. And all you had to do was make him step back, and you would pass that portion of the test. But like no one was able to do it, because like there was like some limitations on the type of magic and whatnot that you could use. And so people are trying to push him, hit him, get through his defenses, and no one was able to do it. And then Murderer Lady just wandered up and cut him in half. And one of the things was you can't kill him, right? And so she's like, oops, I got too deep. And so then she's getting like told that she's getting dropped out, and she's talking to the hair lady, the second proctor. And she's like, I'm confused. Like, and then Ubal's like, well, I was able to cut because I can imagine it, and that's all you need to do. And remember, there's like a conversation we had before about pure instinct and how she bases her magic. She's like a hedge witch. It's pure instinct. Like there's no like knowledge or thought process really. It's just like how she feels. And so her imagination is like very strong in her ability to like do magical stuff because of that, which allows her to do a lot more crazy things than she would normally be able to do. When someone who's like more learned and like understands magic, right? So it's like her intuition, her like pure instinct, Dragon Ball Z, allows her to excel when she doesn't like know that much, and her spells aren't like really that powerful. So that she just her older sister, who she grew up with, was like a seamstress or something, and so she just saw her cutting cloth all day. So this guy's an invulnerable cloth. To her, that's nothing. It's like it's cloth, and I just cut it and it cuts. And the same thing with her hair. And so then we switch back. And she gets kicked out of the competitions, which is why she's still a third-class mage. And then we switch back to the present, and she's killed the Shadow Link Proctor too. And then we switch back to the Proctor too, and she's like, my only weakness out of anyone here is her. So she's the only one who could possibly beat me here. Or it's very easy. Like, there's no doubt. Like, she was going to beat my Shadow Link version. Like, there's, it's like the... And then when we switch over to, like, the Pretty Mage, and she's talking about how... Someone's talking about defenses and offenses, and she's like, Magecraft is like rock, paper, scissors more than, like, strength versus strength. In that there's always, like, a weakness. There's always, like, a hole. And there's, no matter how strong your magic is, there's something that, it's like the fire ice, right? You can be the most powerful fire... a demon of all time, but then like in Final Fantasy you're weak to ice and it just like destroys you. You could be like Doom Train and you just throw like a phoenix down at it and it dies. Stuff like that, right? Like there's like a weakness. So that weakness is more important than like any of this other stuff. Interesting stuff. So she beats her, and then the pretty lady runs into Northern Mercenary and his crew, and they have defeated their Shadow Link versions. And she's like, go and help these guys. I'm going to go find Frieren by myself. And they're like, well, Friren's going to beat the shit out of you. And she's like, we'll see. But I can't... Her biggest trick is that she's like invisible. But if I'm with other mages, it's going to be impossible for me to detect her mana and be able to defend against her. So I need to do it by myself. And so she goes and she runs into Frieren, and they begin their battle. Let's see, who else? Oh, then we see Speedgird, the redheads essentially teamed up, and they're fighting. They fight the Shadow Link Earth guy, and they beat him up, and some other guys. So they're good. And so really the only losses I'm tracking in my head are the Ice and the Earth mages. I think no one else got defeated at this juncture. Is what it seems, yeah. Because the Northern Mercenary and his girlfriend and his like compatriot, they're fine. The guy who was with the hypnotist chick's fine. The pretty lady's fine. Old man's fine. Yeah. Okay. So that leaves the final, the most important part. Because if Frieren and Frieren can defeat Shadow Link Frieren, they can destroy the eye, the crystal that is summoning all these things, and it's super easy to kill. It's like it has no defenses outside of these, and so it's like a snap of the fingers and it's dead. Then everything else will die and everyone will win, essentially. So they're going back and forth, and Frieren, and then we see it's like a super cool magic battle, jumping around, casting spells, doing this, doing that. Fern's like prepping and like kind of blocking out of the way, and then Frieren's like, I need to. At some point, Frieren tells Frieren, she's like, okay, so what might need to happen is I got to show a weakness to Shadow Link Frieren so that it creates a weakness in itself, and that's the opportunity you have to strike it. Because that's what it'll do. And then she starts walking towards the door, and then Fern's like, you really think I can do this? She's like, oh yeah, I totally trust you. I've been underestimating you this whole time. And Fern's like, yay. Anyway, so after this sweet-ass battle, Frieren creates like a little weakness in her shell, so she takes like a little nip on the shoulder from Shadow Link version of herself, a little hit. And it's at that point that Frieren strikes her with her thing and like does a super powerful like blast, but ruh-roh, it didn't kill her. So Shadow Link Frieren strikes Fern like super hard and pushes her up against the wall, doing like a lot of damage. Like she's like, oh fuck me. She's like, I never knew that was a spell that existed. This hurts so bad. And then she like blinks and she's like, Frieren lied to me. And you see Frieren like pop out of the smoke and do this like super like upwards like stalagmite like energy blast to destroy her shadow self. And so everything was a ruse to get Frieren to do something that she otherwise probably wouldn't have done or had the confidence to do. So I guess it's probably, I mean, maybe it'll explain it more later. It doesn't explain in this episode, but then they kick open the door, they blast the thing, and then everyone else is saved from having to fight. And then, like, people are pretty beat up from all, the different people. Because, another thing that happened was Old Man, Murderer, and Nerd, they run into like more copies of like themselves. So they've already defeated a copy of Murderer, but now they think's creating more copies. So it's like a perpetual cycle. But all that disappears. So they all survive, and then they all walk into the treasure room, and Proctor 2 sitting there, and she's like, congratulations, everyone here. You get to continue on to the final test, I'm assuming, of the first class examination. And then they're like, hey, we're the ladies of the hour. And then she like points, and Frieren is half trapped in a mimic again, with Frieren being like, Jesus Christ. And then we get a shot of everybody upstairs getting healed and taken care of, and some of the mages that got kicked out, we see them, so they're doing okay. I don't think anyone died, it looks like, from what I could see. So yeah, fun stuff. We pick up with Stark talking to his homie, the old man, who thinks he's training him as a master. He then says the exact same thing he said previously and then wanders off. But instead of Frieren coming up this time, it's Fern. And Fern confesses that her and Frieren are fighting again. Why are they fighting? Because Fern's staff broke in the second challenge to become a first class mage. And after it broke, she wanted to get it repaired. But Frieren essentially said, it's trash, you can get a better one, let's get you a better one. And then she got mad and stormed off. And the reason why she's so mad is because Hyder, the priest who raised her, gave it to her. And it means that much to her. And she's very keyed in on it and everything. Meanwhile, we see the old man and the redheaded girl meeting up with the rock guy who kind of lost the last match, and he's very sad eponymous about it. And he's working in his shop, and he has like a conversation with the old man and the redhead, and they're kind of talking to him about stuff and yada yada yada, and he's just very bummed out. Once they leave, Frieren comes in, and he's like, "Oh, my day just got worse." And she's like, "Hey, I hear you fix staffs." And he's like, "You bet." And she gives him like Fern's staff, and he's like, "This is just trash. You should get a new one." And she's like, "Well, could you fix it?" "Well, if you can't fix it, that's fine." He's like, "Oh, fine." So then he fixes it. Fern gets she eats her feelings with Stark, and then they see the stone guy, and he mentions this. He mentions essentially the staff being fixed, and that he wished they just bought a new one so he could have more money. And she gets into her place, and Fern's passed out on the bed, but her staff's fixed, and she's super happy about it. We then go to the elf lady, Zephyr or Zara. I think it's Zara. And she's talking to the first class mages, which are like Hair Girl, the guy from the first thing, a glasses guy, and then the old man that got Frieren in the contest in the first place when she used her like old trinket. And they're having a conversation, and the elf lady she came because of Frieren, and Frieren essentially, there shouldn't be so many people that pass the first two trials. The only reason so many people pass the first two trials is because of Frieren. And so Zara wants to take control of the third test, and she's just going to use her magic of intuition, which just knowing whether people, whatever. Her intuition, people keep referring to it as her intuition. She just goes with intuition. But essentially she has a lot of mana, and she's suppressing it, just like Frieren does. But no one notices that it's fluctuating. Even so, the old man was her apprentice, and he was like the first class mage ever. And he sensed that Frieren has like a fluctuation in. He noticed like for a second a fluctuation in her mana, even though it was kind of pulled really down, but no one else noticed that. And Zara, like, she's walking off to do the proctoring for the third test, and she kind of mentions it to herself that no one has ever noticed like her fluctuations, no one's brought it up to her. So then we have the series of the different individuals going for the test come in, and she like fails them immediately. And essentially she fails them because they can't imagine themselves being first class mages. Like her mana level and her strength is so like awe-inspiring to them that they become like scared and concerned. And it's like if they can't imagine themselves being first class mages and they get stunned by this situation, then she fails them right away. And then we get Frieren. Frieren comes in, and she's like, "What up?" And Zara's like, "Oh, you're still doing your crazy thing, right?" And Frieren's like, "Yeah, it's fine. I know you're going to fail me, so I'm just going to go." And then Zara's like, "Oh, that's what the conversation's about." She's like, you can't conceive of yourself as being a first-class mage because you knew I would fail you no matter what happened." And then Frieren's like, "Yeah, you betcha, so I'll just catch you later." And then Zara's like, "Hold up, what's your favorite spell?" And she's like, "The spell that creates the flowers." And then she's like, "Oh, yeah, your old master's spell." And then we get like, Frieren kind of like recalls that one day she was she's like, "I can't believe you beat the Demon King." And then Frieren's like, "Well, I did it because I had friends." And then she recalls sitting with Himmel while the dwarf and Hader are sleeping. And Himmel's like, "We met before." And Frieren's like, "No, I don't remember that at all." Because she asked him about why her specifically when there's so many other powerful mages around. And then he tells this story about how when he was a little boy, he was like wandering in the woods lost, and he was scared, and it was dark. And then this elf mage shows up and just like points the way back to his home. And then for some reason, she decided to cast her flower spell. And that like changed the way he viewed magic, and like his life totally turned around or whatever because of that spell. And then so that spell's brought her, and then she mentions to Zara that like this spell's brought her so much joy and happiness in her life that she couldn't think of anything else that would be worth it. Like with her master, with Himmel, with just continuing to do stuff as we've seen in previous episodes of season 1. And so then Frieren tells Zara as she's about to leave, like, "Hey, Fern, don't just fail her automatically. She is the beginning of the age of humans when it comes to magic. You'll see." And then she leaves. And then Fern comes in, and then Zara's looking at her, and she's like, "I see you're stunned. You're afraid of my mana." And then Fern's like, "Well, no." And Zara's like, "What? What do you mean?" And then Fern's like, "Well, I see a fluctuation." And then Zara smiles because it's the first time anyone's ever noticed the fluctuation in her mana. And so then Sarah's like, "I want you to quit being with Frieren and stay with me, and I will train you, and you'll be the greatest mage that's ever existed of all time, and I will teach you all these things." And Frierin's like, "Is it required for me to? Will you not pass me if I don't?" And Sarah's like, "Maybe." And then Fern recalls right before this happened, Frierin's like, "Hey, Zara's going to pass you no matter what, and she's going to offer to train you. So only do it if you really want to, but you don't have to pass and be a first class mage." And then we go back, and then Fern's like, with all due respect, I want to stay with Frieren and have her train me. And then Zara's makes some comment about her, like, Frieren prepared you or told you this was going to happen, didn't you? And Fern's like, "Yes." And then Zara's like, "All right, well, you pass. Welcome to being a first class mage." Time to wrap up this season. So this episode is that. It's wrapping things up. It starts off before the credits, just kind of a reiteration of Zaveta, something like that. The elf lady asking Fern again if she wants to be her apprentice, and she says no, she is with Frieren. And then her saying, "You pass," and then Fern smiling outside. We get the credits, and then we get some more people who pass. So we saw the people who didn't pass. So the people who did pass, the old man passes. She has a conversation with him, and the conversation is essentially like, "When you walked in, you thought about how to defeat me, and then you gave up." And he's like, "Yeah, I mean, I considered it, and I thought about ways I could do it, but then I realized I would just get killed." And she's like, "That's good, you pass." So essentially the intuition is purely, and this comes up again and again, is based on people not being afraid of her. Like, if they can show up, see your mana, and not be scared or not be concerned, or have, like, consider, like, what they're going to do, which is what Fern did, right, noticing the fluctuations and stuff, then she'll pass him. So the old man passes, then the mercenary guy, he passes because he comes in and does the same thing, essentially. He comes in and is like, "Oh, I could defeat you." Or how he could defeat, and then he's like, "No, that's not going to work." And so she passes him. The clone guy, we actually find out the real guy's never been here. The whole time this was going on, it was just clones. It was clones on clones and clones. It's like the inception of clones. Because there's like there's a clone that walks in, and she's like, "You're really not going to come in here?" And he's like, "I did come here. I'm over here." And she looks at him and kind of like rolls her eyes and is like, "How's your tea doing in your home village?" And it like zooms all the way to this guy drinking tea in his home village. And he like glances off to the side. He's like, "Well done." And she's like, "You pass." The fuck? That's crazy. The murderer lady passes because obviously she's a psychopath, so she comes in and is like, "I'm going to kill this bitch." Let's see. Who else? So that's that guy. Oh, the pretty lady, she passes because she comes in and she's like, Zara's like, "What are you thinking?" And she's like, "I walked in and I thought, you are so adorable, I just want to squeeze you," or some shit like that. And she's like, "What a weirdo, you pass." Oh, Lord. I think that's everybody. Yes, I'm pretty sure that's everybody. Okay. So then we get Fern and Shark are just hanging out at a bakery trying to decide what they want to eat. And then Fern reaches for something, and there's redheaded fast girl and Gramps, as we refer to him, the old man. And he's super rich, right? He's like a noble. So he buys stuff for everybody. And they have like a little snack, and they chit chat, and they have like a fun little conversation. And the old man says something. He's like, "Tell Frieren I'm really grateful for what she did, and she inspired me to love magic again and like enjoy life better. And now I can finally visit the grave of like my wife." And he tells like his sad story about how his wife, when he met her, she was sickly, but then she died, and he wasn't like. And right after she died, he was able to become like a high-ranking mage noble, and then he could have done something, but it was too late. So he never had kids or grandkids or remarried. It's like very sad. So. And then Fern's like, "Why don't you tell her yourself?" And he's like, "That's a good point. I probably should." Then everyone who's like graduating gets invited to a soiree where they are going to get their like privileges or whatever, and then they're going to get their spells and get made, and they can invite 2 guests. And so of course Fern invites Shark and Frieren, but when they show up to the event, Frieren gets told she's been banned from the Magic Academy for 1,000 years and then Frieren's like, she's such a child. She like goes off sad, and the Shark's like, I'm gonna go make sure she's okay. And Frien's like, all right, see you both. And so Shark and Frieren are just kind of like hanging out. I'm trying to think of anything else happened. Oh, sorry, I forgot something. So before this happens, Frieren's got like, a bunch of grimoires that she got, and she's like, ooh, the city of magic does not disappoint. And then she sees a lady drop like oranges on the ground, and she's like, sits there and thinks for a second, and then the northern mercenary guy comes up and like helps her pick all this up. And then he goes and like asks Frieren why he's like, are you really the mage that traveled with Himmel, and you're not helping like random strangers who have problems? And Frieren's like, well, I considered it, but then I didn't. And then we get some recollection about how Himmel would always stop and do all this stuff. And the guy tells the story. He's like, I remember reading stories about the hero Himmel and everything. And, he killed this dragon, and he conquered this tower and did these great events. And then whenever I talked to like the elders who were there when he was alive and doing his adventuring, they would always talk about like, oh, he helped like repair this cart, and he helped like gather these sheep or whatever bullshit thing. And that's what they remembered, and I didn't realize it. But then one day I realized when he saved my town, and I saw like a ruined town, and I was like, what matters is home, So he's headed back home because he lives in the northern frontier with like his lady friend and his co-conspirator. And then Frieren kind of remembers like Himmel doing this stuff. Like one time they were like herding sheep or something. And then so then while moving forward, Frieren and Shark are just hanging out. The old man, who's like the apprentice of the elf lady, he comes up and he's essentially is like, I'm here to like leave a lasting impression so my master remembers me in the future. And he attacks Frieren, and she defends herself and then takes a little bit of damage. And she's like, we're not doing this, is dumb. And then she remembers talking to the elf lady about all her apprentices. Like she always chooses these humans, and then she becomes upset because they never become like legendary heroes or anything. But she remembers all of them, and she remembers all their failings, and she'll always remember how they disappointed her and what their favorite spells were. And so Frieren essentially tells this guy, like, it doesn't matter if people remember you, Zavera or whatever, it will always remember you, and you need to stop being an asshole. Oh, good stuff. So, and then Fern comes out and she's like, I did it. Why are you injured? And she's like, don't worry about it. Let's just go find a church and I'll heal up. So they do that, I guess. Because then they start moving on their way out. And as they're leaving the city, headed onwards to their next destination, they bump into water and ice magic ladies. And they're like, bye, Frieren. We just wanted to say goodbye and thank you so much. And we're going to prep even more. And you inspired us to try again in 3 years for first class magic. And she's like, no problem, guys. High five. And then she keeps walking, and Frien's like, that was pretty brief. And then Frieren has a recall about Himmel, the same conversation. Like, the dwarf was like, hey, that was a pretty brief goodbye to like this guy we were helping herd the sheep. And then Hader's like, oh yeah, I mean, we drank with this guy like every night and hung out with him all the time, and we're just like, adios. And then Himmel says this thing where he's like, well, yeah, I mean, it'd be embarrassing if we had like a crying farewell. Like, I'll see him again, and when you see him again, it'll be less embarrassing than if I'm like, oh, I miss you, thank you so much, and blah, 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 blah. And then Frieren, like, in the present, Frieren, like, smiles and thinks about that and is like, yeah. And they're on their way. And then that's the end of the season. We get some, like, shots of people, like, doing stuff, like the murder lady walking off and, like, the mages standing there and whatever, and plays some nice music. And it's like a really, not a somber ending at all. It's just kind of like a, what do you want to call it? It's very chill. Anyway, so that's the end of season 1 of Frieren no Sosu or something like that. Anyway, I liked it. It reminded me a lot of Violet Evergarden, which is like one of my favorite animes of all time. I don't know if I like this as much as that. I think like spoke to my heart a lot more. This was very cozy, and that's the best thing. That's what I can say about it. And I was talking about Shining Force with my wife. I'm playing that right now through all the Shinings, and I'm just playing it, and she's sitting there and she's like, "This, you enjoying this?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's super cozy. Like I'm like zenning out, just like fighting stuff and chilling." And that's really like I don't know. I like just like sometimes you want to be sad and you want to feel emotional, like Violet Evergarden or Her Lie in April. Sometimes you want to be like, fuck yeah, like Fairy Tail or Dragon Ball Z. And sometimes you just want to chill and like be at peace with like the universe. like Shining Force or like old school. A lot of old school Japanese games are like that. Like these old school role playing games are just like, it's just nice. The stories are just nice and fun, and characters are cool, and it's everything just makes sense, and there's not like weird shit or like bizarre things or people trying to like do whatever. And that's how I felt about this show. It's just like, I mean, it's just like you're watching it. You never feel like there's a threat or anything, but that's fine. It's just kind of like a very cozy situation. So I really liked it. I would highly recommend anyone who likes anime or fantasy stuff at all, even if you don't like anime, that this is like a high quality fantasy show. And it's pretty fantastic. The characters are all good. They're well written. I'm looking forward to like future seasons, which I assume are going to happen because the show was like super fucking popular in Japan and here. So, and I, at first I was like, popular stuff, boo. Then I watched it, I'm like, all right, I get it. Yeah, it makes sense. I get why it was so popular. It's definitely fantastic all across the board. Like no complaints whatsoever. So highly recommended. Excellent show. Excellent watch. I'm glad I finally like bit the bullet and gave it a shot. And definitely looking forward to more. And just feel at peace. Feel very cozy. And it was great. All right, cool. Well, again, like, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you all later.